ITV bosses will be grilled by MPs amid reports that Philip Schofield's young lover was paid off by the channel.
Good morning, it's 6 o'clock on Wednesday the 31st of May. This is Breakfast on GB News with Ellie Costello and Peter Andre.
Here's what's leading the news this morning. ITV executives will face televised questioning by MPs over how they handled Philip Schofield's affair with a younger male colleague. It comes as the Prince's Trust charity drops the presenter as an ambassador, saying it was no longer appropriate to work together.
Ministers are facing accusations of a cover-up after it refused to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages to the pandemic inquiry. The government have been given an extension, with the unredacted files now due at 4 p.m. tomorrow.
Artificial intelligence could wipe out humanity. That's the warning from industry leaders in an open letter in which they compare the threat to nuclear war and pandemics. The Prime Minister confirmed yesterday that he's in talks with world leaders about managing the danger it poses.
And with the NHS at breaking point and soaring food costs pushing people towards less healthy options, obesity has never been a more pressing issue. We'll take a look at what can be done to solve it and how we can stop our children making the same mistakes.
And do get in touch this morning on any of the stories that we're going to be talking about. GBNews at gbnews.com or on Twitter at GBNews. This is very exciting. Are you happy to be here?
I'm very happy to be here. It's the earliest I've been up in years since my 6-year-old was 2.
We had our meeting at about, 5 o'clock this morning? No, about 4 o'clock this morning. And Pete came in and he went, I don't know the last time I was like this time. Must have been for the airport.
I know, and I saved my coffee till about 40 minutes before so that the caffeine can kick in about now.
Very good tip. But you're awake now and we're going to have lots of fun and we're talking about lots of things that you're passionate about today, aren't we? We're going to be talking about obesity, raising children, the threat of social media, lots of really important topics. So there's going to be lots and lots to discuss. Do join us today. Let us know what you think about any of the stories that we're going to be talking about. GBViews at gbnews.com. We do love to hear from you and we'll try and share as many of your views as we can throughout the programme. But to our top story now, and ITV bosses will face questions from MPs over how much they knew of Philip Schofield's affair following claims that his lover was paid off by the channel.
The Daily Mail has reported that the younger man received a financial settlement from the broadcaster before being moved to a different daytime programme within the organisation.
Well, meanwhile, former ITV presenter, now GB News breakfast host Eamonn Holmes, spoke to Dan Wootton for part 2 of an exclusive sit-down in which he addressed the controversy around so-called Qgate.
They were there to make a film on the Queen's funeral. Now, unless there's any documentary evidence of this, I would put it to you that is another lie. So Philip Schofield admits he lies. ITV lie. The place is a den of iniquity, an absolute den of iniquity.
Which brings us to that night at the National Television Awards where everything changed. And then, lo and behold, Eamonn, just a few days later, you're asked, out of the blue, confronted, ambushed, you might say, to reveal that Philip was going to come out as gay. So what happened that night at the National Television Awards from your perspective, and how did it lead on to Philip coming out?
So anyway, he comes into our dressing room and he falls down on his knees. I mean, the acting is amazing. You know, he falls down on his knees crying. And I said to him, what's the matter? What's the matter? I'm gay. I'm gay. And I walked over and I said, is that all? So we then began to feel there was a certain line being pattered here. We said, no, I know what I'm going to say. Us believing the truth is that Philip is revealing he's gay and coming out. And Ruth ad-libs without any autocue or anything else. I just decided at this point, not sure. I'm just beginning to feel bad vibes about this. I think I'm not saying anything. Then it goes to those two in their choreographed way, knowing how false they are. I'm sure they rehearsed it for days as to what they were going to say and do and who was going to hug. And Holly was very specific about where she sat, where Philip sat, where Ruth sat, where I sat. It was all choreographed, right?
So this has been planned for some time.
It's been planned for some time. And it was all a bit weird.
Yeah.
At that stage, though, I believed he was gay and that's what he was coming out, and that was the information we were given. We were lied to, and Ruth and I, to this day, are embarrassed and ashamed when we see those pictures, when we see the toils that some people who are tortured by their sexuality have to go through. And this man, was this a cover-up for something else?
Well, he doesn't mince his words, does he, Eamonn? And that was an explosive interview. You can watch the whole thing on our GB News YouTube channel. Let's speak to showbiz reporter Hayley Palmer. Good morning to you, Hayley. Really good to see you. What do you make, then, of Eamonn's allegations? This is part 2.
Yes, I have to say that I rushed home to watch this last night for part 2. The things I wanted to flag up that I thought were interesting, he said about the Queen's funeral. He said they were there to make a film on the Queen's funeral. Did we ever actually see the film? No, we didn't. So that's the first thing.
He's not letting it go.
He's not letting that one go. We love Eamonn. He also said why Holly and Phil were allowed to advocate drinking when they appeared on air after the NTAs. And I have to say that's something I've always thought, is that OK to go on and say that you're drunk? Or I don't know if that's an act or not. But for me, that doesn't quite sit well. And also he said that Eamonn recalled how Philip confided in him in the green room before he came out live on air, and he said that the whole thing was choreographed and staged. So that was the 3 things that I flagged up from last night's interview. Also, Philip has been dropped as an ambassador for the Prince's Trust and airbrushed from We Buy Any Car YouTube adverts as well. I was reading this morning. I mean, Philip actually got to interview the late Duke of Edinburgh for a special show, didn't he? So this is, it's not a surprise, obviously. For me, I would just like to flag up, as much as I don't agree with anything that he's done mental health-wise, I don't think this has been brought up enough, is that I just feel that someone that has gone from here to here, that is a concern for me.
Yeah, you do worry, don't you, in the age of, you know, Caroline Flack and hashtag Be Kind, you do worry about what you say, someone who's gone from the height of fame all the way crashing down, you know, everything that he's known has been taken away from him. You do just hope he's got a good support network around him, no matter what he's done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, everyone has their view on this. We all have our view. But for me, it's something that I haven't heard much of. And it doesn't sit well with me because I'm always, you know, talking about mental health and, you know, we all go through things in our life, but to have that strain, I can only imagine what he must actually be going through. Wrongly or rightly, I just would like to flag that up this morning.
And it's still, you know, there's still a lot of speculation and there's a lot of things that we're reading about, but we don't actually know which parts are 100% correct and what aren't. So it's something that's we're going to navigate over the next few days and see what happens, because things are changing.
You're right, it's changing so much, isn't it? Hour by hour. I mean, they're saying now that Holly is going back on Monday. How's that going to pan out? I don't know. I mean, they're saying that the whole show could be axed. I mean, is that fair on everyone else that works on This Morning? Is that fair on the other people behind the scenes, the production staff, Alison and Dermot? Would that be fair on them? I don't think so.
What is so interesting is, as you say, This Morning as a brand, because it is this wholesome family show. I mean, you've been on it for many, many times over the years. It's known as being this really comfortable, warm, friendly show. And then to hear allegations from Dr. Ranj Singh this week, Eamonn Holmes this week, saying it's actually a really toxic culture, is going to damage the brand, isn't it?
It absolutely is going to damage that brand. And you're right, I think it's the viewers that I actually feel sorry for, because you know, people like my mum or, you know, people that will sit and watch it religiously every day, you believe in that, don't you? It becomes part of your day, becomes part of your life. So for them, I feel like they've been lied to. And I feel like once that trust is broken, it's very hard to come back from that.
It's interesting about Holly saying she'll be back, or they're saying that Holly's saying she'll be back. But if you look even just a week ago, where Philip had stepped down from This Morning, but he was still going to be presenting the Soap Awards, or there was still a big daytime, I think a primetime TV they were going to give him. So things are changing very, very quickly. So, you know, we don't know if that's going to be true or not. But there's a lot going on, and it seems like it's just the beginning as well.
I agree. I think there's so much more to come out. I feel like we're not being told everything at the moment, and I feel like this is going to unfold.
Yeah.
Everyone's got their story, haven't they? I mean, I actually did my work experience when I first started in the industry at ITV. I was at this morning. I didn't notice anything going on. I thought it was very professional. I didn't have much to do with Philip and Holly. You know, they were very much kept themselves to themselves, but that's just my view that I saw when I was there. But obviously everyone does have their view of how they've been treated. And, you know, there's nothing worse than working in a toxic workplace. I have been in a toxic workplace myself, and it's something that I wouldn't wish upon anyone. So I feel like it needs to be addressed. Could they maybe say, do you know what, maybe this has happened. We hold our hands up. What can we do for here? I feel like the viewers, we'd be like, yeah, you know, let's move forward with this together and think of a solution. But I think it's like the unknown at the moment, isn't it? And all these things keep coming out. We don't know what to do.
And very briefly on that point, Hayley, ITV bosses, they're going to be facing questioning by MPs next Tuesday about this. They're going to be asked about how much they knew about Philip Schofield's affair and how they handled it. And so far, they've just pretty much said there was an investigation, they found nothing. Is that going to stand up, do you think? Or do you think people are going to have to step down over this?
I think people will have to step down. I really do. You're right. Next Tuesday, bosses will be meeting with Parliament. It's going to be televised. I think all eyes will be glued.
Box office, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, let's see what happens. That really is the next step. I don't think ITV have actually said anything for a couple of days now. So I really feel like that will be the next saga to unfold.
And they'll have to have their story ready for then, won't they?
Absolutely.
They'll be having
questions
to
need to be answered, not only for ITV but for the public as well. We want to know answers.
And just quickly, just on my point, you know, I've been there many, many times.
Yeah.
I never saw anything like that.
Okay, yeah.
Everyone was nothing but nice to me, but, you know, I guess everyone's had different experiences.
Exactly. I mean, you're a nice guy, Peter. You know, and that comes across, and I'm sure, like, you get on well with people. So,
yeah.
But like you say, everyone's got their different view, and
yeah, absolutely.
You hear good stories and bad stories, don't you? I don't think that's the problem. I think that the problem is that, you know, we feel like we've been lied to. It's not even what's happened; it's how it's been covered up. I think that's what doesn't sit well with the public.
Yeah. Hayley, brilliant to have you. And you're with us next hour as well, aren't you? Brilliant. OK, we'll see you then. I think it will be a shame to see This Morning go. I really hope that it can hang on. It is such a loved show. But as we were just saying, ministers are facing... Oh, this is a totally different story, actually. Forgive me. Ministers are facing accusations of a cover-up after it refused to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages and diaries to the pandemic inquiry.
The government has now been given an extension with the unredacted files now due at 4 p.m. tomorrow. Well,
joining us now is political analyst Leon Raleigh. Good morning to you, Leon. Really good to see you this morning. So interesting. There was that 4 p.m. deadline yesterday for all of these messages and diaries to be handed over, and now that's been extended by 48 hours. Now, would that suggest that the government is seeking to comply with this? They do want to hand over these messages and diaries?
Well, if you listened to Rishi Sunak yesterday, he was out there saying, we are complying. We've handed over thousands of pieces of correspondence that will help this inquiry understand how we made these decisions that affected all of our lives around COVID. But there's a key issue here about WhatsApp messages between Boris Johnson, his aides, his staff, and I think that's the bit where the government are a bit reluctant to release it. And perhaps it's because there is correspondence in there with Rishi Sunak, with current ministers, that could be of reputational issues to them and others further down the line. So there is this reluctance for the government to hand over these messages, and clearly this extension means that they've got more time to consider their legal position as well as their own moral position, as it were.
Is it clear whether they have the diaries and the messages in their possession? Because yesterday it was more a sense of they have it, but they didn't think it was relevant. They don't think they need to hand everything over. Now it's a suggestion that they don't even have them in their possession. And then that poses the question, well, if you don't have them, then how would you know that it's not relevant?
It all smells a bit fishy, doesn't it? I mean, you know, they say that actually these aren't relevant, but now they're saying they haven't even got these messages. So I think there is a bit of a scramble in Number 10, in Whitehall at the moment, trying to consider, well, how on earth are we going to be able to position ourselves in a way that frames us positively? And, you know, for them to say, actually, we don't even have these messages, I think it just makes the public feel as though they are trying to hide something. And that isn't a good look, because this whole purpose of the inquiry is for us to understand how these decisions were made. And it just smells a bit fishy, doesn't look quite right. And I think that's a problem for Rishi Sunak and the government.
And then the question, of course, about WhatsApp being private, and then you think someone in a position of authority should definitely be able to hand over what they've got. So you wonder, you wonder what's going to happen here.
You do, Peter. And I think, look, if anyone handed over their WhatsApp messages, I think we'd all be reluctant to do that because there's things in there that, might not be necessarily wrong, but it's just not you don't expect those messages to be out in the public. And I think there is actually an argument you can make, which is politicians should be allowed to kick around ideas in private, not have that scrutiny of the public immediately. And we've got this 20-year rule in the UK, which means that after 20 years, we then release correspondence between ministers or private documents to the public. But after that 20-year period, so that there's enough water under the bridge, as it were. And I think now the government is looking at this and thinking, well, if we release this precedent of being able to have our messages just laid out in the public immediately after we've made those decisions, what does that mean for our decision-making going forward? So this could be a really interesting and consequential story going forward.
Yeah, it's significant, isn't it? There's also lots of stories going around about AI today, but some terrifying headlines this morning, Leon. The front page of the Eye, Peter, if you don't mind grabbing that. AI creators fear the extinction of humanity. And again, on the Daily Mail, AI could wipe out humanity. The threat is bad as nuclear war. We've got a clip of Rishi Sunak talking about AI, so let's have a quick listen to that.
AI clearly can bring massive benefits to the economy and society, and you've seen that recently, where it's helping paralysed people to walk, discovering new antibiotics, but we need to make sure that this is done in a way that is safe and is secure. Now, that's why I met last week with the CEOs of major AI companies to discuss what are the guardrails that we need to put in place, what's the type of regulation that should be put in place to keep us safe. People will be concerned by the reports that AI poses an existential risk like pandemics or nuclear wars. I want them to be reassured that the government is looking very carefully at this, as I said, already having met with the companies, and I think the UK can play a leadership role.
So what do you make of that? Obviously, he's saying there's some good that AI can do, but there's also destruction.
Yeah, and I think, the long-term risk of AI is worrying, and there could well be an issue further down the line that takes it on par with nuclear war or pandemics, as the Prime Minister suggested. But I think also there is a short-term implication of AI that needs to be looked at by government as well, because it's going to touch every area of our lives. I mean, even in your business, Peter, as a singer, you can make new Peter Andre music without you even knowing about it.
Well, I don't want to inflict that on anyone. Thank you for that. But this is the thing. I mean, some people are so against AI completely. But if you think even back to a calculator, when a calculator first came out, and it was using that to help you, something that you would normally use your brain for, and there are benefits of it,
100%.
for sure. But where it goes, and if there's no control over it, I mean, you look at some of these things like TikTok, there's no control over that. I mean, how are they going to control this?
No, and I think we have to think about young people, them going into a new world, effectively, that is going to be dominated by AI. And, what's reassuring about this is Rishi Sunak is a Prime Minister who understands the world of tech. He spent time out in Silicon Valley. He understands the language that these tech bosses speak. So I'm reassured that he is someone who can get a grasp on the issue, and actually that we are talking about this, because you look at social media, and when that started to come to fruition, that's now become a Wild West, effectively, because politicians were too late to regulate social media. I think the fact we're getting in with AI fairly early can be reassuring to us.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we can take a sense of security, perhaps, from the front. The fact that Rishi Sunak does want to be on the forefront of this, doesn't he? Thank you so much, Leon. Really good to see you this morning.
Great to see you.
Now the time has just gone 18 minutes past 6. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories.
Trans rights activists interrupted an address at the Oxford Union by feminist philosopher Kathleen Stock. Stock spoke for around 10 minutes before activists from the university's LGBTQ+ society started booing and waving rainbow flags. One of the protesters appeared to glue herself to the floor before being escorted out by security.
Customers on prepayment meters are being urged to avoid missing out on £400 worth of support with their energy bills. All households were eligible for the government's Energy Bills Support Scheme, which was paid in 6 instalments over the winter. But with £130 million still available to be claimed, households are being urged to redeem their vouchers before the deadline on the 30th of June.
British stars of the hit show Ted Lasso have joined picket lines in LA amid the ongoing Hollywood writers' strike. Hannah Waddington, Nick Mohammed, James Lance and Jeremy Swift were spotted holding placards outside the Warner Brothers studios. Over 11,500 members of the Writers Guild of America have been on strike since the start of the month.
Now, this is a story that's got us talking this morning. It's in page 3 of The Sun. I'll hold this one up for you. It's Bacchus, Sacchus and Crackers. Is that right? Yeah. And apparently the Romans started waxing their body hair 2,000 years ago. Essentially, they've dug up these ancient razors, almost tweezers, that people were using on their armpits, apparently, 2,000 years ago, trying to remove body hair. It's amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing when you think how far we've come, and you think of each decade where this sort of body hair thing has gone.
Yeah.
If you think of the 80s and the 90s, completely different. And now people are trying to find themselves again. There's people talking about women embracing all the body hair.
Yeah. Yeah, we had the actress Rachel McAdams, I think it was last week, she did a photo shoot and she had hairy armpits, and there were quite a few women responding saying they've stopped shaving as well. They've thrown away their razors. What do you think? Do you think we're going to go back to growing body hair?
I think it's up to the individual. You know, I think we went too far the other way.
What, in the 90s?
Yeah, I mean, 80s and 90s, you know. I think people are starting to find the happy balance.
And what about men? Do you think they should be
I was
hairy
actually
beasts?
referring to men there.
Oh, were you? I was talking about women.
Because guys went through that stage, going to the gym, shaving their legs and all sorts of stuff. You know, I know, because and you see it now, you know, people are hairless. I mean, I'm Greek, but I'm actually not
You're not
hairy
actually
at all.
that hairy.
But most Greeks are. That was a generalisation, wasn't it?
Yeah, well.
Yeah, the thing is, I think it's OK to look after yourself, but maybe there's a bit of a... Not too much.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
See, there's a lot of preening now, isn't there? I mean, if you watch Love Island or any of those sorts of shows, the men are just as groomed, if not more so, than the women. So I still think we're in that space.
Yeah, gutted, because they all look good as well. Yeah.
So maybe it's not going to change anytime soon. But it is interesting. I think, especially with women, I think there is that move towards ditching the razor. Do let us know what you think at home. Would you ditch the razor? Especially if you're a woman, let us know what you make of that. Is it for you or is it not? GBViews at GBNews.
Is it for you?
.com. It's certainly not for me. No, you won't catch me doing that anytime soon. But each to their own. Now, train services are being hit by more strike action this week. Drivers who are members of ASLEF and RMT unions will walk out today in that ongoing dispute over pay and conditions.
The strike is expected to affect families on half-term breaks and passengers travelling to the FA Cup final this weekend.
Well, our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson joins us now from Birmingham New Street Station. Jack, good morning to you. I mean, this is an ongoing dispute, isn't it? It feels like Groundhog Day, I'm sure, for many commuters there. How will passengers be feeling this morning and what can they expect on the rails?
Well, yeah, good morning to you both. We are coming up to 12 months since the first dispute with the train strike, with the train strikes and this industrial action. This is the start of 3 days of action this week. Today and Saturday, we've got the ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, walking out, and on Friday, we've got 20,000 members of the RMT going on strike as well. The ASLEF Train Union, of course, means that there's going to be widespread disruption across the country. When you look at some of the mainline services like Avanti West Coast, cross country, they're going to be running absolutely no trains whatsoever today. Some longer distance journeys, companies such as Great Western Railway, they're going to be running some limited services, but across the country it's only expected around 40% of services running today, and as I mentioned, those services that are running are going to be extremely short, and they're going to cause mass disruption to, of course, commuters around the country. Now, one of the things that somebody walking by, running into the train station to see if there was any trains he could catch, you know, he was saying that he tried to catch the bus this morning. Lots of people around the country have come up with alternative ways because of how long this industrial action has gone on. They know what to do on a train strike day, the other way they can get into work, whether it's a car share, whether it's other methods of public transport. Of course, here in Birmingham, in a big city like this, there's tram networks, there's bus networks. There are many other public transport networks to use instead of the trains when industrial action like this happens. But as you mentioned, there is going to be mass disruption all this weekend when you look at the FA Cup final with, of course, that Manchester derby. Fans from Manchester aren't going to be able to use the train services to to get down to London. Of course, the Epsom Derby as well. So on half term, it's going to affect children, football fans and people across the country as this industrial action continues.
Oh, Jack Carson, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed there. It's going to be another difficult day on the rails for those commuters and people wanting to get out and about. Thank you very much. Oh, it's very difficult, isn't it? It does feel like Groundhog Day. 12 months almost.
Does. And the thing is, they're picking days where people are, you know, there's other people where they're trying to prove a point and tell what their needs are. There's millions of people being affected with their needs. So it just seems to be too much.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, were the days chosen purposefully to cause mass disruption? I mean, it might seem that way. We had it with the Eurovision Song Contest, didn't we, a couple of weekends ago? And then we've got the Manchester Derby this Saturday.
It's peeving off a lot of people.
It certainly is.
Yeah. OK, stay with us. As food prices continue to skyrocket, we'll take a look at how high costs are fueling the obesity crisis. That's next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back. Good morning to you. The time has just gone 28 minutes past 6. Still lots to come on today's programme. The King has shown his gratitude to the 150 Royal Navy personnel who took part in the Queen's funeral procession by presenting them with the Royal Victorian Order Honour. We'll bring you the details just before 7.
And at 7:20, we'll try and settle the age-old debate of whether men should be allowed to go topless once the sun comes out. Interesting.
Yeah, you're going to have an opinion on that. I'm going to have an opinion on that. And lots of you at home will as well. So do get in touch with us. gbviews@gbnews.com. Lots of you have been getting in touch this morning. Lots of people very, very excited to see a certain Mr. Peter Andre this morning. Niall has been in touch saying, welcome to the family, Peter. You really haven't changed a bit.
Oh, wow.
Angie says, the best start to the day, waking up on the best news channel and with Peter Andre. Sharon says, what a beautiful, gorgeous couple to wake up to, both beautiful inside and out. And James says, as a regular viewer of GB News, can I just say how delightful it was to see Peter Andre on the show. He's looking very well indeed.
Well, that's really kind, but I have told my mum to stop using different names to try and write in, honestly. But that's very, very kind.
Yeah, lots of you have been really, really kind. So thank you so much for getting in touch with us this morning. There's been a few comments on the ongoing Schofield saga as well, haven't there?
Yeah, so we've got Andrew says, I feel let down by ITV, and the presenters having lied to me. I religiously watch This Morning every day and I feel I will no longer be able to. Elizabeth says it seems Philip Schofield has got away with a lot during his career and now he's been caught out. And Tony says, well said, Eamonn.
OK, yep, keep those views coming in. And on obesity, we are going to be talking about obesity in just a moment, but Andy's been in touch and says, in my opinion, most people who are obese are just lazy and eat rubbish. I think it's all self-inflicted and I thereby have no sympathy. Interesting, you haven't minced your words there, Andy. Let us know what you think of any of the stories that we're talking about today, whether it's just saying hello to Pete, or we're talking about the Schofield scandal, or obesity. We love to hear from you. gbnews@gbnews.com.
As food prices continue to soar, there are concerns that the cost of living could be fueling the obesity crisis as families choose less healthy options over cooking their own meals.
Well, let's speak now to Paul Gately, Professor of Exercise and Obesity at Leeds Beckett University. Really good to see you this morning, Paul. Thank you for joining us. So can you explain that link for us between the cost of living crisis and obesity? Because people would think if you don't have money, how are you affording to eat so much?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for having me and good morning to you both. Yes, we've known for some time that there is a sort of disparity between people with in terms of their income and their impact on obesity. And what we sort of understand is that when people are challenged with financial challenges, that it has a ripple effect across their life. So it has a ripple effect in terms of their mental health. It has a ripple effect in terms of stress levels, has a ripple effect in terms of their sleep, but also has a ripple effect in terms of their purchasing. So when, as a family, they might walk into the supermarket, they've got a limited budget, they're trying to think about health for their children, but at the same time, they're also trying to think about how much food can I afford? What can I afford? When will it last? How long will it last? And so families often are a bit nervous when they're struggling financially, are a bit nervous to buy foods like fresh fruits and vegetables, because whilst they might be cheaper, they're also perishable. And they're worrying about, well, will their children eat? Will they not eat? And so therefore they'll go for options tending to be higher calorie, higher energy density, less healthy options because they know their children will eat it. And it's that sort of challenge that families tell us that they face is really critical.
9% of adults in England were obese and a further 37.9% were overweight. So is there any way of controlling this, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think there is a way of controlling this. And, we've known for some time what to do. The real challenge is that we've not had government leadership for about 15 to 20 years, really, on this agenda. And it's time that obesity is now high up the political agenda because the costs to our economy are significant. We also know with families on the breadline that it's really challenging too. And I'm lucky to be involved in a project called the FIO Food Project with a number of universities across the UK, from Aberdeen to Liverpool to Leeds to London to Cambridge. And we're really trying to understand particularly different types of families, what challenges they face, what we can do to help them, and how we can implement those things on a day-to-day basis, and how we can get that information to government, because at the moment the messages that government are sort of sending out there are just not landing. We know from the families that we work with families through an organisation called More Life, and we're trying to help families understand how to live a more healthy life. And what they tell us often is, for those that are more financially challenged, the price is driving everything. It drives largely any of their decisions. So these families are not making stupid decisions. They're really weighing up on a day-by-day basis what they can afford, what they can't afford. And healthy food is fundamentally more expensive.
And that's the issue, isn't it, Paul? It's not an easy fix in that sense because, as you say, price drives everything. I remember being at school and a chicken and chip shop near my school. It was something like you get chicken and chips, a portion of chicken and chips, for £1.50. So kids would just leave school and buy that because it was a hot meal, it would fill them, but essentially it was really, really cheap. So you can understand, can't you, in a cost of living crisis, when money is scarce, you're wanting to eat something over nothing, and it does end up being that unhealthy food, which is cheaper.
That's right, but it doesn't have to be, though, and that's, again, the work that we're doing through More Life and Leeds Beckett University. We're really trying to work with families to understand what are their challenges, what are the sort of things they could do, and what are the things that they're not doing, and sort of try and pull them together. And that's what we're learning a lot about now. And families are very smart about this. You know, we assume that families, lots of people assume that families are stupid, and that's just not fair. They really are very sort of good with their money. The problem is that their options are more limited, but with the right help, we can help families change their behaviours.
Difficult time for people and families. The last thing they want to be told is you should be doing this, you should be doing that. There's so much pressure on everyone, and this is just an added pressure. And they are going to go for an easier option, especially in times like this.
I mean, Paul, is it down to education as part of this? I mean, as you say, there are ways of eating healthier and eating on a budget. Is that about educating potentially children and starting young?
It is about, and that's what we do. We work with children, and actually children are great drivers of this. And one of the things I'd say is families working together. If you've got a mum or a dad or a carer that are really struggling financially, have conversations with your children about it, get them involved in it, because actually they might be more interested in helping parents if they understand what it is they're trying to do. And, just make it a game at the supermarket. It's a great way of engaging with children in terms of saying, how can we get the cheaper options but more healthy? So let's make it a game. They're learning about these things in school, but it's about families being confident enough to have those conversations within the families. Make it a game, make it more of a fun activity for the kids, and they will buy into it. And that's what we've learned when we do work with children and families, that we can, by making it fun, by making it engaging, engage them in healthier options that are cheaper.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for your time. Very informative.
Now, stay with us. As the Schofield scandal continues to dominate the tabloids, we'll be going through the papers with Sean McDonald and Candice Holdsworth. That's next. This is Breakfast on GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Welcome back. The time is 6:39. Let's bring you up to date with today's front pages.
The Telegraph leads with the government's so-called cover-up row after it refused to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages as part of the COVID inquiry.
The Mail says AI could wipe out humanity as tech bosses say the threat must be tackled.
The Express reports MPs have demanded the sacking of civil servants who planned strike action over deporting migrants to Rwanda.
And finally, The Sun believes that Holly Willoughby is preparing to make her return to the This Morning sofa on Monday. So let's go through some of those stories this morning with broadcaster and host of the Blethered podcast, Sean McDonald, and writer and commentator Candice Holdsworth. Really good to see you both this morning. Good morning to you. Morning. Candice, let's start with you, shall we? And it's the story that's been rolling on, the Schofield affair in The Sun, and apparently Holly's going to be back.
Yes, so this is the story that everyone's talking about, and obviously Schofield's gone, but now everyone's wondering what is going to happen to Holly. So this story in The Sun says that she'll be back. We don't know how, in what form, what she's going to say, but a lot of people are saying that she needs to go as well because she's tainted by this. I must say, though, I have pretty mixed feelings about that. I'm not sure if she should be carrying the can for what he's done. I mean, I understand that she was his friend, their brands were so linked together, but I feel like people are blaming her maybe more than she deserves. And I think that maybe we should give her a chance to redeem herself. That's my position on it.
OK. Sean, what do you make? Do you think she should come back?
Yeah, you know, I think Candice makes a great point that you shouldn't hold a woman responsible for the actions of a man. However, I think she has now become inextricably linked with this story, because to come out and say, oh, I had no idea, oh, I was lied to, you know, I asked Philip once and he said no and that was it. It now seems to be transpiring that there's actually a lot more to it than that, which then I think throws a bit of ambiguity or doubt around whether she was actually being genuine. I think now it's getting to the point where this is rumbling on and on and on, and it's making her position untenable, but it's threatening the future of the show. And there are a lot of people that work in that show. There are producers, there are runners, there are people that have worked on it for a long time who are kind of in the background and you don't really get to say anything. I think now it's getting to the point, you know, if I was working on that show as a producer, I would thinking, please leave, please let us, you know, move forward.
And I wonder how much the brand, as in This Morning as a brand, has been damaged by this. And therefore Holly might not want to come back because she doesn't want her own brand to be tainted anymore.
Well, this is the thing. I think it is damaged, and I think that picture-perfect image is gone. I mean, I don't think she'll ever be able to have that again. She'll have to come back in some other form. What we don't know, but I think people are looking for more authenticity now. I mean, that's just the general vibe that I've got from this whole affair. It's like people want something a bit more real now, which is why Alison Hammond, people have, you know, been talking about her so much, because she just does give off that impression a lot more, that she's not trying to be something she's not. It's not some false persona in any way. That's who she is.
I mean, Holly's a great presenter, and you know, when you look at somebody like, say, Ant and Dec, who really you can't see one without the other. Yeah. I might be the only one that thinks this, but I think Holly on her own has done exceptionally well, and you kind of accept her on her own as well. So, you know, whatever she goes to do after this, I'm sure she'll be brilliant. Yeah. And if she comes back, she'll find a way to sort it out.
Well, she's got her whole Instagram brand now as well. I think it's called Wild Moon or something like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, she's still very young as well. She's still got so much ahead of her. I mean,
and she's, as you say, she's a businesswoman, isn't she?
Yes.
Children's author as well. I mean, she's got brand deals with M&S and various other places. I mean, she is very successful in her own right.
I also just wanted to add to the conversation, obviously with the subject matter, it's a very visceral and emotive type of subject, you know, what is being discussed with what's happened with Philip Schofield, but I would also hope that we could kind of move, and maybe that's our job and that's our responsibility, to move that discussion back to being very matter-of-fact, because again, I understand a lot of the anger, but the social media furore is nuts. And it's a very easy thing to cast up. It's becoming a bit of a cliche, like a hashtag, but the Caroline Flack thing, if we've learned anything, it's like, look, let's deal in fact, let's deal in discussing things rationally and sensibly, because before you know it, things could take a bad turn, and then watch how quickly people do a 180. It doesn't mean there shouldn't be culpability or responsibility, but it requires, I think, a degree of responsibility on our part, you know, when we're discussing these types of things.
Yes.
No, I think that's a really important message. I think it's really important not to speculate. And as you said, Peter, earlier, this is changing all of the time. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen on Monday, do we?
No, that's right. So you'll have an opinion on Monday, and then your opinion will change. OK, the Mirror.
Yes.
Fury as PM, WhatsApp messages go missing before inquiry.
Yeah, running and hiding is the Daily Mirror's headline here. So basically there's accusations of a COVID cover-up. The Cabinet Office is insisting that it no longer has messages from Boris Johnson that they said were irrelevant to the COVID inquiry. Now, if they're irrelevant, why are they hiding them? So that's this sort of contradiction that is coming up here. They've been given a 4 p.m. deadline, or they were given a 4 p.m. deadline yesterday to give Baroness Heather Hallett, who's leading the COVID inquiry, the former PM's messages as part of... it's part of the investigation. So this is a kind of multifaceted one because you've got people from the COVID, the bereaved families. Let me just get the name of it. Sorry, I've lost it. But the bereaved families that are sort of campaigning for information as to what happened and what lessons can be learned from during the pandemic. The group's Becky Cummer, she said, whoever is sitting in the Cabinet Office is scheming to come up with excuses to stop the inquiry from accessing Johnson's WhatsApp messages, which is casting a lot of aspersions over whether, one, the Cabinet Office are telling the truth, and the questions that are arising is what exactly is Boris Johnson trying to hide? To be honest with this guy, it could be absolutely anything. Like, as we know, Downing Street was like Magaluf during lockdown. So what is it they're hiding?
To be fair to Boris Johnson, one of his spokespeople came out last night and said he's more than happy to hand over his messages and his diaries. He hasn't been asked by the Cabinet Office for them yet.
I don't believe... Do you honestly think that the Cabinet Office and Boris Johnson haven't been in some sort of dialogue with regards to that? Because there is an element of privacy, because I think the Cabinet Office are saying they're irrelevant in its privacy, which I think is a fair point. But when it's something that was so serious and was played out so publicly, then it is relevant to the inquiry. There's no chance that they've not had that dialogue, in my opinion. I respect that you have to point out that was said. I think this is something that will rumble on and on unless they come out and hand them over. Because you've even got former civil service boss Lord Kerslake. He said there's a cover-up going on to save some form of embarrassment, and the longer they hold on to them, it's just going to get worse.
I think there's a wider question here, which is a very interesting one, and it's how much privacy should a Prime Minister and ministers be entitled to? I mean, should it be requested of them to hand over their entire WhatsApp messages, the back catalogue, and all of their personal diaries? I mean, normal people wouldn't want that to happen, would they?
No. And we do know from when Matt Hancock's personal WhatsApps were leaked, I mean, he'd actually deleted a lot. I mean, the journalist Isabel Oakeshott didn't have all of the WhatsApps because, like you say, I'm sure there's things there that people have just fired off, maybe in an anxious moment that they don't want people to know about. And during the whole COVID panic, when everything was going on, I mean, I'm sure there were things that they highly regret saying at the time, which could look bad for them. And so I think, even with the COVID inquiry, I think we do have to look at things in context. What was going on at the time, how they were making decisions. Obviously, transparency is important, but I think for me, I've also tried to think, what would I have done in that position? And it's so easy for me to say I would have done X, Y, Z. But when you have so much responsibility, I think you will tend towards extreme risk aversion.
I mean, when you're in a position of authority and you're telling the country what they should and shouldn't be doing, it does make sense that we need to know what was said.
Yes.
In everyday life, people WhatsApp. This is different. This is someone who is leading the country.
Yes, absolutely. Look, what I don't want, though, is... It's important, but I think it was Tony Blair that said that the one problem is, though, is when everything is so transparent, you don't get to have frank conversations with your colleagues. And I think that can be an issue as well, because you don't want people saying things that they don't mean or not voicing things that are important because they're worried later on they could get into trouble.
Yeah, and that is a potentially dangerous precedent, isn't it? That if all of these messages are handed over, that ministers and governments to come will feel as though they can't discuss things with their colleagues openly for fear of it being handed over to an inquiry.
Yeah, I understand the point you're making, Candice. I think that's a great example of what Tony Blair said about transparency. But Pete, I completely agree with you. When it's government business, when this is official government business, then the mode of communication kind of becomes irrelevant. If you're communicating in a way that's written down, it's government business, then by law, you know, if you delete emails, you could be looking, that's a criminal offence. The deletion and the sort of holding back of official government communication is against the law. You can't be doing that, especially not to obstruct something like this, especially not with the record that Boris Johnson has had in office, and he is now gone for a reason.
Well, you will certainly have a view of that at home. Do get in touch and let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. Candice, let's have a look at the Telegraph, shall we? And this is Kathleen Stock at Oxford Union last night, and there was an activist who glued herself to the floor.
Yes. Yeah, it made it all about her. She wasn't invited to speak, so she made it all about her. So, you can't believe it. So Kathleen Stock, the gender-critical feminist, who has given a supposedly very controversial talk at Oxford University, that was last night, which many students were unhappy about. They were trying to shut it down. There were huge protests outside, but it went ahead. I mean, it's been this big free speech debate about, you know, who should and who shouldn't speak on university campuses. I mean, if you've ever listened to Kathleen Stock speak, she's the most mild-mannered philosophy professor. She's very logical. I mean, you cannot believe that she's created this much controversy. I find the whole thing very, very interesting. I mean, they should be able to protest as well, as long as they don't shut it down. I mean, that was my issue with the whole thing. They're allowed to have their say, but they've got to let her have her say as well.
Sean, what did you make of the scenes last night?
Yeah, you can't have... You can protest, but you can't have free speech if it is blocking other people's free speech. There are obviously lines in terms of the paradox of tolerance and don't tolerate intolerance, but you can't say, well, my free speech is far more important than yours. Then where does that leave us? It just...
Is that what Kathleen Stock's saying, though?
No, I think that's... And I'm talking about from the other side, yeah. That's my point, and basically saying you can't be shutting her down and say, well, my free speech is far more important than yours. You're allowed to protest, and it kind of comes back to the protest in general. Yeah, and I always defend people sometimes to the point where we end up arguing about their right to protest. But when it does start to infringe upon the rights and freedoms of others, then we have a serious problem.
OK, we've got...
Yeah, right, so the Times, this is an incredible story as well about vapors. Must be for smokers, not children.
Yes, so basically the UK has been urged to tighten what is the loosest e-cigarette rules across Europe, which is quite funny, a bit of a paradox, because actually Britain has the heaviest restrictions on actual cigarettes. Something I noticed strangely when I was coming through duty-free yesterday in Glasgow Airport, I noticed there was a wee back room, and that's where your cigarettes and your cigars and stuff are. People will notice if you go into a shop that you won't see them anywhere, they're hidden, which is great, you know, out of sight, out of mind. But on the other hand, you've got these single-use vapes and the flavoured vapes, which I honestly think over time could go on to be worse than cigarettes, because it's like these boiled chemicals. And I'll hold my hands up. There's nobody worse for it in a night out than me. If I see someone with one of those wee fruit vapes, I'm like, yeah, give us a shot of that. But they're bad because, you know, they're single-use, they're really cheap, they're becoming a real litter issue. But further down the line, they're going to have probably catastrophic health implications, and that is something that, again, if you want to look at it from a wider perspective, could cost fortunes for the NHS. So I would completely back this. Rishi Sunak is saying that he's going to look at it, what that means. But I've been talking about this for ages. I would say ban them or make them cost a fortune, tax them heavily.
Yeah, or market them differently. I mean, what concerns me is the fact they're in these fluorescent colours, like almost collectible items. Yeah. They've got wonderful smells.
Oh, they taste so good. They taste amazing.
You can see why children, teenagers, would just pick one up when they nip into the shop.
Incredibly dangerous. If you think about, say, a kid picking up a cigarette and they would cough, it would be disgusting on every level, but they would try and overcome that to look cool, as it might have appeared in the 80s and the 70s and the 90s. But these are appealing because of the flavours, like you said. Yeah. So now all of a sudden you've got a whole different kind of fear because kids want to do it to look cool and they like it instantly. It's very scary.
Difficult. I honestly would like to see a sort of psychological study into whether they have some sort of pacifying, calming thing, because they look like dummies, like people are just constantly, using them.
Yeah. Well, Sean, Candice, you're going to be back in the next hour. Really, really good to see you.
Great.
The King has given his personal thanks to Royal Navy personnel for their part in the late Queen's funeral procession last September. Yes, 100 junior sailors were given the responsibility of pulling the state gun carriage carrying the late Queen Elizabeth II's coffin through the streets of London. Well, our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, has this report.
A day that went down in history, and a huge responsibility for the Royal Naval Ratings, that's junior sailors, tasked with pulling the state's ceremonial gun carriage that carried the coffin of Queen Elizabeth II through the streets of London.
Very honoured, to be fair. I didn't think I'd ever get to do something like this in my career.
It's a great honour to be part of Her Majesty's funeral, and it's a great responsibility as well.
A tradition dating back to 1901 for Queen Victoria's funeral. And it was that sovereign who instituted the Royal Victorian Order, rewarded for personal service to the monarch, and is given only by the sovereign. Perhaps a sign of King Charles's gratitude, His Majesty personally bestowed around 150 RVO medals to ratings and officers. The King presented the medals inside the quadrangle of Windsor Castle, just a short distance from St George's Chapel, the final resting place of Queen Elizabeth II. The special parade marched onto the quadrangle via the George IV Gate. Accompanied by the First Sea Lord, Admiral Sir Ben Key, the King took the royal salute and the national anthem was played to mark his arrival. Recognising the important role they played during the funeral, it took close to an hour, but the 150 naval personnel who, less than a year ago, were at the heart of the important global event received a personal thank you from the King, including heavily pregnant medical assistant Paisley Chambers-Smith, who was awarded a silver Royal Victorian Medal for pulling the gun carriage with her colleagues. The 25-year-old is 7 months pregnant and wore a blue summer dress, as there is no Royal Naval ceremonial maternity wear. In the bright summer sunshine, 6 naval ratings were helped off the parade ground after apparently fainting, but at least 2 returned to receive their medals. A moment, perhaps, will be hard to forget. Cameron Walker, GB News, Windsor.
Now, coming up, ITV is to face questioning by MPs over their handling of Philip Schofield's affair.
We'll bring you the latest after your forecast with Greg Dewhurst.
Hello there, welcome to our latest broadcast for GB News. I'm Greg Dewhurst. It's looking largely dry, settled over the next few days, plenty of sunshine, particularly in the west. Looking at the bigger picture, high pressure sits to the northwest of the UK, keeping everything settled, but a little bit of a keen northeasterly breeze for some eastern and southern coasts will just take the edge off the temperatures, particularly where it stays a little bit cloudy. And it's quite a cloudy start out there this morning, particularly across central and eastern areas, best of the sunshine across western Scotland, Northern Ireland. But through the day, the clouds should slowly lift and break. But just notice how it does stay cloudier than the recent days across central swathes of the UK. Parts of southern Wales, the Midlands, may stay cloudy all day. And where we keep the cloud, temperatures really struggling, 16, 17 Celsius. But in the best of the sunshine, the low 20s, perhaps even around 25 degrees across western Scotland. Some sunshine breaking out across southern counties of England too. So a fine end to the day across the west. Eastern areas still dry, plenty of weather to enjoy, but it is on the cloudier side. And then through the early hours, we'll see that cloud sweep back westwards as we move towards dawn. Temperatures holding up, generally 9 to 11 Celsius, some clearer skies across the northwest, but this is where we'll see the sunniest start to Thursday. Northern Ireland, western Scotland, elsewhere quite a grey start, some drizzle in the wind possible, but through the day the clouds should lift and break, hopefully push a little bit further eastwards compared to Wednesday. So sunnier skies, most likely Wales down into the West Country. And this is where we'll see the highest temperatures getting into the low 20s. Still under the clouds, some struggling across eastern coast around 12 or 13 degrees. And then to end the week and into the weekend, plenty of sunshine to come. In fact, perhaps more sunshine for the vast majority of the UK. And temperatures above average, still reaching the low 20s, though perhaps a little chilly at night.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
all sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
ITV bosses will be grilled by MPs amid reports that Philip Schofield's young lover was paid off by the channel.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock on Wednesday, the 31st of May. This is Breakfast on GB News with Ellie Costello and Peter Andre.
Here's what's leading the news this morning. And ITV executives will face televised questioning by MPs over how they handled Philip Schofield's affair with a younger male colleague. It comes as the Prince's Trust charity drops the presenter as an ambassador, saying it was no longer appropriate to work together.
Ministers are facing accusations of a cover-up after it refused to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages to the pandemic inquiry. The government has been given an extension with the unredacted files now due at 4 p.m. tomorrow.
Artificial intelligence could wipe out humanity. That's the warning from industry leaders in a joint statement in which they compare the threat to nuclear war and pandemics. The Prime Minister confirmed yesterday he's in talks with world leaders about managing the danger it poses.
And with the NHS at breaking point and soaring food costs pushing people towards less healthy options, obesity has never been a more pressing issue. We'll take a look at what can be done to solve it and how we can stop our children making the same mistakes.
Lots of you getting in touch today on loads of the stories that we're talking about. Lots of people getting in touch on obesity. Andrew says, I struggled with my weight due to not being able to afford healthy food and having to rely on food that's high in sugar and salt. As a single father with 5 children, I put their health first and the ripple down effect is causing me concern. I'd like to take my shirt off in this warm weather, but I would feel too embarrassed.
And Andy says, how offensive was that comment made about overweight people being lazy? I've been active my entire life, but an underactive thyroid and severe arthritis in both legs, exercise is very restricted. I don't do takeaways or drink.
Yeah, that's a good point. Jean says it would also be helpful if many of these families knew how to cook from scratch. And that's a really good point, Jean, because it is often the cheapest way to do it. But not many people actually know how to cook from scratch or to make nutritious meals at home.
Yeah, and Brian says, I'm certain that it is the volume of food that is the main cause of obesity rather than the cost of living.
Yeah, and lots of people are loving the fact that Peter Andre is here this morning. Evelyn has been in touch saying, just wanted to compliment Peter on his birthday and point out that I think he's doing fabulously well. Hope to see lots more of him in the weeks to come. Carl says you're doing a grand job, Peter. Ellie's going to look after you, and I will. Yeah. Kimberly says, I switched TV on before work. It was great to see Peter. What a treat first thing in the morning. David says he likes your white shirt and your black tie. You look very smart, he says. And Selena says, how very lovely waking up to Peter this morning. Well done, GB News. Great recruiting.
And now for the bad comments.
There aren't any. You all love Pete, so do keep your views coming in. On Peter Andre, on any of the stories that we're talking about today, we do love to hear from you. gbviews@gbnews.com. To to our top story now, and ITV bosses will face questions from MPs about how much they knew of Philip Schofield's affair following claims that his lover was paid off by the channel.
The Daily Mail has reported that the younger man received a financial settlement from the broadcaster before being moved to a different daytime programme within the organisation.
Well, meanwhile, former ITV presenter, now GB News breakfast host Eamonn Holmes, spoke to Dan Wootton for part 2 of an explosive sit-down in which he addressed the controversy around so-called Q-Gate.
They were there to make a film on the Queen's funeral. Now, unless there's any documentary evidence of this, I would put it to you that is another lie. So Philip Schofield admits he lies. ITV lie. The place is a den of iniquity, an absolute den of iniquity.
Which brings us to that night at the National Television Awards where everything changed. And then lo and behold, Eamonn, just a few days later, you're asked out of the blue, confronted, ambushed, you might say, to reveal that Philip was going to come out as gay. So what happened that night at the National Television Awards from your perspective, and how did it lead on to Philip coming out?
So anyway, he comes into our dressing room and he falls down on his knees. I mean, the acting is amazing. You know, he falls down on his knees crying. And I said to him, what's the matter? What's the matter? I'm gay. I'm gay. And I walked over and I said, is that all? So we then began to feel there was a certain line being pattered here. We said, no, I know what I'm going to say. Us believing the truth is that Philip is revealing he's gay and coming out. And Ruth ad-libs without any autocue or anything else. I just decided at this point, not sure. I'm just beginning to feel bad vibes about this. I think I'm not saying anything. Then it goes to those two in their choreographed way, knowing how false they are. I'm sure they rehearsed it for days as to what they were going to say and do and who was going to hug. And Holly was very specific about where she sat, where Philip sat, where Ruth sat, where I sat. It was all choreographed, right?
So this has been planned for some time.
It's been planned for some time. And it was all a bit weird. At that stage, though, I believed he was gay and that's what he was coming out, and that was the information we were given. We were lied to, and Ruth and I, to this day, are embarrassed and ashamed when we see those pictures, when we see the toils that some people who are tortured by their sexuality have to go through. And this man, was this a cover-up for something else?
Well, he doesn't mince his words, does he, our Eamonn Holmes? And you can catch the entire interview on our GB News YouTube channel. Now, our South East of England reporter Ray Addison is outside of Television Centre in London, where this morning is filmed. And Ray, very interesting, front page of The Sun today, reporting that defiant Holly will be back on Monday.
Yes, good morning to you both. Absolutely reports that Holly is determined to be back on that sofa, this morning sofa, on Monday morning. However, I think it all comes down potentially to endorsements. The purge has begun, if you like. We're starting to see a number of announcements ever since that exclusive Eamonn Holmes interview on GB News with Dan Wootton. Of course, the Prince's Trust, as we've been hearing, has dropped Philip Schofield as an ambassador. They're saying that in light of those recent admissions, they've agreed with him that it's no longer appropriate to work together. We Buy Any Car has removed any adverts featuring Schofield from their YouTube channel as well, and ITV bosses as well being called to appear before a parliamentary committee next Tuesday. They're going to be asked questions by those MPs about how they've handled this whole affair. And one of the top questions that they potentially will be asked is those reports of a payoff. Reported in the Mail that Schofield's young lover received a financial settlement from ITV after he was moved to another department. That certainly could be one of those top questions that MPs will be asked about. Now, of course, the second part of Eamonn's exclusive interview with GB News was aired last night on Dan Wootton's show, and he previously had accused Schofield of toxicity. Now, last night he gave an insight into some of the events that led up to Schofield being forced to leave the show. Of course, talked about Q-Gate, how Schofield and Willoughby skipped the queue to see the late Queen when she was lying in state. Of course, ITV saying that they were there to make a film, and him simply asking, well, where was that film? And he also raised some of the questions about the timing of Schofield coming out in 2020, so close to the event of the National Television Awards, where Schofield's young lover seemingly had a little bit too much to drink, and then was talking to some of the key presenters and members of staff. Now, Eamonn saying that ITV's Director of Media and Entertainment, Kevin Lygo, needs to take action, and asking why was Schofield seemingly protected.
Okay, Ray Addison, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on what is the latest instalment in this saga. It's just set to keep rolling, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. All right, let's speak to showbiz reporter Hayley Palmer now. Hayley, what do you make of what Eamonn has been saying?
Yeah, well, as reported there was a couple of things I wanted to flag up from the interview last night, which was, yes, the Queen's funeral. They said that they were there to make a film on the Queen's funeral, but where was the actual film? We didn't actually get to see the film. So that is something that we do have to question. Eamonn questioned why Holly and Phil were allowed to advocate drinking when they appeared on air after the NTAs, which is something that hasn't sat well with me when they've come on and, oh, yeah, we're drunk from last night. Is that a good advert? For me, not really. And Eamonn recalled how Philip confided in him in the green room before he came out live on air and saying it was choreographed and structured. I mentioned this earlier on the programme. As much as I don't agree with anything that he has done, mental health does play a big part in this. He has gone from up here to down here. I think for anyone, that has got to be a severe effect on your health. And I don't think that is something that has been flagged up.
Yeah.
That doesn't sit well with me because, I mean, I've suffered with anxiety before, and I can only imagine having that kind of pressure on you must just be awful. Who can you speak to? Who has he got to speak to? You know, he said Holly was his rock, clearly not anymore. So, you know, he has his mother. I don't know who he's got to speak to. I just like to point that out this morning, that that's something that does concern me.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to say, and let's hope he has a good support network around him, despite the things that he has done. And, I mean, on the topic of mental health, it does make you feel as well for the team, the young team generally, at This Morning, who are very much in the dark about all of this. They're finding out the latest instalment in this saga, just like you and I on the front page of the newspapers every single morning. They don't know how safe their job is at This Morning because there's reports of it potentially being axed.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody that works in TV, behind the scenes, it might look all glamorous, but it's, you know, you've got to really work hard. You are really striving to get to the top of your career. So for me, it is the people underneath. It's your runners, it's your production team that have worked for years, and if the programme gets axed, is that fair on them? I don't think so, because why should they have to suffer? But it is in any workplace when there is a toxic atmosphere, which has been reported that it has, it needs to be addressed. And for me, if ITV came forward and said, actually, there has been an issue, there has been a toxic atmosphere, you know, we hold our hands up and this is how we are going to deal with it moving forward, I would have more respect. I think it's the unknown that is making us a little bit angry about it.
OK, Hayley, really good to see you this morning. Thank you very much. Now, ministers are facing accusations of a cover-up after it refused to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages and diaries to the pandemic inquiry.
The government has now been given an extension, with the unredacted files now due at 4 p.m. tomorrow.
Well, joining us now is political analyst Leon Emirali. Really good morning to you, Leon. Good to see you. Very interesting timeline, this, isn't it? We were talking about that deadline of 4 p.m. yesterday. The Cabinet Office have asked for an extension. They asked for it to be next week. That's not going to happen. It's going to be 4 p.m. on Thursday. But would that suggest that they are looking to comply and hand over all of these messages and diaries?
I think there's a lot going on behind the scenes, Ellie, because there is even talk potentially of a legal case that the government might take to protect themselves against these WhatsApp messages being released. So I think that there is a great degree of uncertainty at the moment as to what exactly is going to happen with these messages. It is clear the inquiry want to get their hands on every single piece of documentation that might give them an idea about how decisions were made around COVID. And obviously, WhatsApp is an important part, rightly or wrongly, of how our politicians navigate the world of policy making. So it's obvious they want to see that, but the government want to keep things under wraps, perhaps because there's some embarrassing bits in there that might come out and implicate those who are serving in government currently, not least the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
I mean, obviously there's been a lot of leaks to journalists. So the question is, should the Prime Minister have an element of privacy in regards to these WhatsApp messages? I mean, he is in a position of authority, so it's very questionable.
Yeah, it is, Peter. And look, I think we are right to make sure that our politicians are held to the highest degrees of accountability, that they are scrutinised for the decisions they've made. But there's also a counterpoint that lets you say, well, shouldn't we let our politicians kick some ideas around in private before we go to the public and present those ideas for implementation? And I think that is the tension here, not least from a legal point of view, but from a moral point of view, is how do we want our politicians to operate? And look, when I was working in Westminster advising ministers, WhatsApp was the mode of communication that we used. And it's quite bizarre. It doesn't happen in countries like America. I'm sure it doesn't happen in Russia, China, but in the UK, we use WhatsApp to govern. And there's obviously some details in there that will be relevant to this inquiry, but there'll also be a lot of stuff in there that simply isn't relevant to this inquiry. What are you up to tonight? What's for dinner? That type of conversation that goes on, and I don't think necessarily the public need to see those details. If it's relevant to COVID, if it's relevant to decisions that were made, then I think the inquiry should be seeing them. But if it's not, I think it's just going to create headlines, and it might be needless for the sake of the inquiry's purpose.
It's very difficult, though, isn't it? Because, I mean, the inquiry would say that it's not up to ministers to decide what is and what isn't relevant, because then you've got the deletion of messages. It's very, very complicated. Leon, whilst we've got you, there's a different story today about AI. Fresh warnings on some of the front of the papers about it wiping out humanity, potentially. So we'll be talking about that. But let's have a listen to what Rishi Sunak's been talking about AI.
AI clearly can bring massive benefits to the economy and society, and you've seen that recently, where it's helping paralysed people to walk, discovering new antibiotics, but we need to make sure that this is done in a way that is safe and is secure. Now, that's why I met last week with the CEOs of major AI companies to discuss what are the guardrails that we need to put in place, what's the type of regulation that should be put in place to keep us safe. People will be concerned by the reports that AI poses an existential risk like pandemics or nuclear wars. I want them to be reassured that the government is looking very carefully at this, as I said, already having met with the companies, and I think the UK can play a leadership role.
So Rishi's saying that there are benefits to AI, but obviously there's a huge danger, probably because at the rate it's accelerating at. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is it, Peter. I think that AI is incredibly useful for most people. I mean, I use it to research articles or research certain topics. I'm sure lots of young people use it for helping them with homework and
essays,
that type of thing. Essays, I'm sure. But there is a dangerous side to AI, and it is exactly around that exponential learning that AI can do. And if we are creating this godlike intelligence, where does that leave humanity? And I think this is the worry. The worry that Rishi Sunak's talking about and this idea that it could wipe out humanity, I think that's long-term. I think as AI gets more developed, more advanced, that existential threat will exist. But there's also a short-term threat about AI. What does it mean for our jobs? What does it mean for the world of work? How is it going to upend our economy? And I think there has to be a big, wide-reaching discussion about how we use AI in society. And I'm encouraged, actually, that Rishi Sunak is taking this step at this point, because we can draw parallels maybe with social media, these new technologies that come along. Politicians don't quite understand how it works, and it just runs rampant. That's what's happened with social media, and now, hopefully, with AI, we can get ahead of it so that we can use it for its intended use rather than it becoming an issue for us.
OK. Leon, really, really good to see you this morning. Thank you so much. It's difficult, isn't it? Because I agree with Leon in the sense that we should feel encouraged that Rishi Sunak is at the forefront of this and wants to be meeting with all tech bosses and finding out as much as he can. But there is this danger, and it is proceeding at such a rapid rate, isn't it?
That's the scary bit. It's happening very, very fast. We think stories are changing every day. This is changing every minute.
Yeah, and how do you get ahead of the curve? It's very, very difficult. Do let us know what you think at home, gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, the time is 18 minutes past 7. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories.
Rail passengers are facing more travel disruption amid further strike action, with train companies warning services will be severely reduced. Members of the drivers' union, ASLEF, will walk out today and Saturday, while the RMT union is holding industrial action this Friday.
Trans rights activists interrupted an address at the Oxford Union by feminist philosopher Kathleen Stock. Stock spoke for around 10 minutes before activists from the university's LGBTQ+ society started booing and waving rainbow flags. One of the protesters appeared to glue herself to the floor before being escorted out by security.
Customers on prepayment meters are being urged to avoid missing out on £400 worth of support with their energy bills. All households were eligible for the government's energy bill support scheme, which was paid in 6 instalments over the winter. But with £130 million still available to be claimed, households are being prompted to redeem their vouchers before the deadline on the 30th of June. The King has given his personal thanks to Royal Navy personnel for their part in the late Queen's funeral procession last September.
Yes, 100 junior sailors were given the responsibility of pulling the state gun carriage carrying the late Queen Elizabeth II's coffin through the streets of London. Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker has this report.
A day that went down in history, and a huge responsibility for the Royal Naval Ratings, that's junior sailors, tasked with pulling the state's ceremonial gun carriage that carried the coffin of Queen Elizabeth II through the streets of London.
Very honoured, to be fair. I didn't think I'd ever get to do something like this in my career.
It's a great honour to be part of Her Majesty's funeral, and it's a great responsibility as well.
A tradition dating back to 1901 for Queen Victoria's funeral. And it was that sovereign who instituted the Royal Victorian Order, rewarded for personal service to the monarch, and is given only by the sovereign. Perhaps a sign of King Charles's gratitude, His Majesty personally bestowed around 150 RVO medals to ratings and officers. The King presented the medals inside the quadrangle of Windsor Castle, just a short distance from St George's Chapel, the final resting place of Queen Elizabeth II. The special parade marched onto the quadrangle via the George IV gate. Accompanied by the First Sea Lord, Admiral Sir Ben Key, the King took the royal salute and the national anthem was played to mark his arrival. Recognising the important role they played during the funeral, it took close to an hour, but the 150 naval personnel who, less than a year ago, were at the heart of the important global event received a personal thank you from the King, including heavily pregnant medical assistant Paisley Chambers-Smith, who was awarded a silver Royal Victorian Medal for pulling the gun carriage with her colleagues. The 25-year-old is 7 months pregnant and wore a blue summer dress, as there is no Royal Naval ceremonial maternity wear. In the bright summer sunshine, 6 naval ratings were helped off the parade ground after apparently fainting, but at least 2 returned to receive their medals. A moment, perhaps, will be hard to forget. Cameron Walker, GB News, Windsor.
Now stay with us because coming up, sun's out, guts out. We'll ask if men should be free to go topless when it's hot outside, and if that right should be extended to women. You won't want to miss that discussion. We know you're going to have a view on that, so stay with us because that's up next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Good morning, welcome back. The time is 7:26, still lots to come on today's programme. At 7:45, we'll take a look at the psychology of food and how the behaviours we learn as a child can haunt us for the rest of our lives.
And at 8:10, as industry leaders warn that AI could wipe out humanity, we'll take a look at what governments are doing to mitigate this risk.
And lots of you getting in touch this morning. Do keep your views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet us at gbnews. And you'll certainly have an opinion on this next story, so do get in touch with what you make of it all, because summer is on its way, and with temperatures rising, some may feel the need to strip off. But not everyone's a fan.
Yes, some argue that if it's OK for men to walk about topless, then it should be OK for women to do the same.
But is it acceptable for men to go topless when it gets hot outside? Well, joining us now is behaviour expert Liz Brewer, who says it's inappropriate for men to go topless in public. Meanwhile, former Love Islander and performance coach Josh Kempton says there's nothing wrong with shirtless men and it shouldn't be seen as a big deal. Good morning to you both. Really, really good to have you both with us. Josh, let's start with you, shall we? So you're saying it's no big deal.
I think it's completely situation dependent, and in my personal opinion, on a hot summer's day, no one wants to see any guy walking around any town centre, any shops or restaurants with their top off. It's just not what I feel is quite respectful. However, if you take yourself off to a park, you can have a significant a picnic with a significant other, going for a run. I think that's completely fine. I just think you have to just understand what you feel is respectful in that situation. And like I said, even like my early memories of going to the park, playing football with my friends, we used to use our T-shirts as goalposts. And I really don't feel like that is a problem.
Well, first of all, you look good, mate, so that's one thing to start off with. Liz, what are your thoughts on this?
Well,
Josh, I did a little bit of research, and I know you did Love Island, and all the pictures I could see of you then, you were shirtless, and especially any image in the papers. But it didn't seem to do you much good because they dumped you after 3 days. And not only did they dump you, none of the girls wanted to couple up with you. Now, I see you've changed your mind now and you think it's inappropriate, which I do too, in a supermarket or down the street for a man to go shirtless. Perfectly okay in the right circumstance. But do you think if you weren't just relying on brawn and concentrated a bit on your energy and your brain and what you had to say, because I can assure you, what we really want to see is somebody who has empathy, somebody who's got something to say, who charms. We may look at you and think, great, he looks good, but we may not take you that seriously.
OK, Josh, that was pretty scathing. Do you focus too much on your physique, do you think?
I think it's taken away from the actual problem, what you're trying to talk about here in terms of suns out and guns out. Me being on Love Island and me looking a certain way is completely different from the conversation we're having today. So I feel like you're just trying to deter from the actual conversation about people being in public places rather than me being on a TV show.
OK. Liz, what do you have to say to that?
Well, you were on a TV show with your shirt off most of the time. That's why I referred to it. And you are here today because of that. That's how you got your notoriety, showing, you know, you're naked from the waist up.
But Liz, I mean, some people may be watching this morning and say we're being too prudish. Men are more than entitled to take their shirts off when it gets hot outside. There's no harm in it.
Absolutely, but it has to be done appropriately. It's actually, in this country still, it's an offence, a jailable offence, to go naked because you offend, if it can be proven that you've offended someone. If you've got your shirt off, there are people out there, especially when you're with public, in the supermarket or wherever, and children. And they feel, it's not that they feel offended, they feel uncomfortable. And we are a nation who, we're not prudish, we're a little bit reserved. It takes a long time to get to know somebody here. And because we're reserved, we do focus a lot on our social behaviour and manners. We worry about it. And in which case, we don't really want to offend people. And in fact, since COVID, even more so, we're far politer now. We actually acknowledge people. We want to really feel that we're being a nice person. To try and shock, and I don't care what you say about, well, it's hot, we have every right to take our shirt off because, you know, we want to cool off. No, you do it in the appropriate place. And I know, Josh, you said that. So my argument is probably similar to you, but I still say I think you'd have done better. When was it, 4 years ago, when you did Love Island?
Liz, if I may just say, I think Josh has said it very well, actually, and he explained, and he was saying similar things to you. Here's my thing. Obviously, I'd be a hypocrite to say that walking around with your shirt off was terrible because I did that and made a living out of that. I know that. But what I will say is this. We're talking about the guys, right?
Oh, there you are.
Let's look at...
Yes, with your shirt on.
But let's look at girls now, right? Why is it not OK, then, for... If you say it's OK on the beach, and I agree with you, Liz, it's fine, but then why... If a woman walked around topless on the beach, there would be people saying... there'll be some people that would like that, I'm sure, but there'll be people that would be saying negative things about
Peter,
it. Why?
We used to go topless on the beach.
Yeah.
It's sort of changed. Girls still, what we're talking about is actually they wouldn't go topless, they'd still have a bra on. I remember doing programmes a few years back where a girl was on an aeroplane and asked to put her top on. And, you know, there's a huge argument. But, in fact, it was incorrect. She was offending people. People felt embarrassed sitting next to her or by the side of her saying, well, you know, you've got a bra on. Now, it's not that there's a difference between men taking their shirt off and a woman. Nobody should really go along and offend other people. And you have to think, not think selfishly, think, how am I affecting those other people? And in which case, it's best not to reveal everything.
OK, Josh, what do you think then about what I was saying about women being able to do the same thing and not feel embarrassed? I mean, you look at breastfeeding, the most natural thing ever, and there's so much controversy around that in public. On the beach, what do you think? Should a woman not have the same rights?
I think they should have the exact same rights. And if you do go abroad, let's say, I'm currently in Milan, and generally speaking, you go into the beach and you will find females with their top off. And I don't think anyone really bats an eyelid. It's just a norm thing to do. And I think that should be the case in England as well. I think there's just a big taboo around that. And I think people just need to get over the fact that it's a pair of breasts. It's just, laying on the beach with their significant other, having a relaxing time.
But, if you want to go naked on a beach, you can. There are areas specifically for that. There is a nudist beach. And, you can join a nudist colony if that's what you want. But again, when you're on a public beach, you've still got to consider there are children around, there are elderly people. It's not just your beach. You've got to consider their feelings.
No, I totally agree.
If you want to, as I say, if you want to strip off, there are areas for you to do that.
So, Josh, final word to you then. So what about for people walking down a beach, so not sunbathing per se, but walking past the families in the restaurants, as Liz said, or elderly couples that are sitting down on a bench? Is it appropriate for men to be walking around with their gut out, essentially?
Well, I think if you look at, for example, take Bournemouth, for example, you've got a lovely walk, you go next to the beach and they walks past some restaurants. I think that's absolutely fine, but I do agree with what you are saying, that we live in a multicultural society and you need to know where you draw the line. I think walking from A to B along the beach, I think it's absolutely fine. And I doubt the majority of anyone is actually going to really care. I remember going to the beach with my grandparents and like my granddad having his top off, and no one really cared. So I don't really think it's age dependent either sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously other cultures in other parts of the world where we have to respect their culture. But the way I look at it is that whatever the decision is, it should be for all genders. That's just how I see it. OK, thanks very much.
Yeah, Josh, Liz, thank you very much. Really good debate there.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be asking if AI could wipe out humanity. Going through the papers with Sean McDonald and Candice Holdsworth. Next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Dubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, welcome back. The time is 7:40. Let's bring you up to date with today's front pages.
The Telegraph leads with the government's so-called cover-up row after it refused to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages as part of the COVID inquiry.
The Mail says AI could wipe out humanity as tech bosses say the threat must be tackled.
The Express reports MPs have demanded the sacking of civil servants who planned strike action over deporting migrants to Rwanda.
And finally, The Sun believes that Holly Willoughby is preparing to make her return to the This Morning sofa on Monday. So let's go through some of those stories this morning with broadcaster and host of the Blethered podcast, Sean McDonald, and writer and commentator, Candice Holdsworth. Good morning to you both. Good
morning. Good morning.
Great to see you. Sean, let's start with the Mail, shall we? And AI could wipe out humanity.
Yeah, how long have I been going on about this in this show? Every time AI comes up, I express my concern about it. It's fun, you can use ChatGPT, it can give you all these great answers, but it's getting a bit out of hand. Now, you've got senior bosses at Google, DeepMind, OpenAI and Anthropic, and you've even got Twitter and Tesla CEO Elon Musk basically expressing grave concern that this could just get completely out of control. There has been a declaration signed by more than 350 experts, including Geoffrey Hinton. So he is like the godfather of artificial intelligence, and he has said, I'm out, this is going absolutely too far. The concerns that are being expressed are basically that AI could try to compete with humanity, but it could be used for nefarious and sort of sinister outcomes, such as influencing elections, creating videos which could end up causing war. It could even be used for sort of missile targets, like it is going just absolutely too far. You've even got another signatory, it's an astronomer, his name's Lord Rees, and he is basically saying as well that we could become over-reliant on these systems. So not only that they could be used for these sort of terrifying things, but whether used for medical outcomes or whatever it may be, that we just become reliant and that humanity then starts to stagnate. My opinion on it is that we really should slam the brakes on this. But it's pretty much like social media. You know, social media ran away from us. Yeah. And we're now playing catch-up as a society in terms of the sort of downsides of it, and I liken it to fire. It's something that could be used for mass destruction, or you could use it in terms of for your benefit, but we first have to get control of it. So please let's slam the brakes, because it creeps me out.
Can we slam the brakes, though? Because my fear now is, how do you regulate this? I mean, the way that we write legislation, the way that we pass legislation, it's laborious, it's time-consuming. I mean, it would take several months to come up with legislation. By the time we come up with it, this has moved on tenfold.
Well, that's it. I mean, I heard Pete saying something about mitigation earlier, and to me that seems to be let's just stop, don't let it proliferate and develop. So the development has to stop. That has to be the first sort of level of containment. Then there has to be some sort of unilateral whether it's legislation, which is obviously very hard to implement because governments have all got different sort of objectives and agendas. I don't know. I mean, that's up to the computer nerds to work out, to be honest, at Google. I wish they hadn't done it, but here we are. I mean, it could be used for, look at the positive slant. It could be used for medical diagnosis. It could be used for assessing x-rays and all these types of things. But it's kind of one of those things where it's getting ahead of us and we kind of have to pause it as much as we can until there's some sort of, as I say, unilateral legislation in which we can contain this.
But Candice, we opened Pandora's box. Can we put the lid back on?
Look, I think what is heartening is you have a lot of very experienced tech experts saying, let's be cautious about this, let's build the safeguards early on. And I think that that's a good thing. You know, we're looking at this from the beginning. We're not just sort of letting it be led by the technology. We're thinking, what have we learned, for instance, with social media and the way that that can be misused for whatever reasons, and let's apply that knowledge to AI. I mean, obviously there are unknown unknowns, things that we can never predict, but let's just be more cautious now. I think people had kind of utopian ideas about the internet, that everything will just work itself out, and you forget that not everyone has good intentions. And with a technology as powerful as this, it can definitely be misused, but I still think, personally, that it's a risk that can be managed. I think we can manage it using our intelligence and coming together on this. Governments, tech experts, people who are concerned about various things.
In the 80s, when we watched films like Terminator, and we thought, that's never going to happen.
I know.
And right now we're sitting here having the same discussion. It's unbelievable. Yeah. But like you said, there's some good as well on the medical side.
Yes.
OK, Candice, Rwanda migrant deal on the Express.
Yeah, so this is in the Express. Apparently, some civil servants are threatening to strike over the Rwanda deal. They are ethically opposed to it and they don't want to carry this policy out. However, there's huge criticism from Conservative MPs, men like Tim Loughton, Jonathan Gullis, who are saying, well, if you don't want to carry the policy out, then you can't work in the civil service. And I think this is just part of the big, larger story of there can be a bit of an adversarial relationship between civil servants and Conservative MPs. And some people say that's not true, but I think this shows that there can be that political conflict with some of the policies that the Conservatives want to carry out, particularly in the Home Office, and with some civil servants who aren't happy about it.
It's a bizarre story, this one, because you would think if you don't want to do the work, the bidding of an elected politician, then you shouldn't be a civil servant, right? Because you're meant to be impartial.
Yeah, I mean, from baseline perspective, yeah, but with the Rwanda thing and the deportations, it is such an extremity that I think the ordinary sort of expectations maybe don't apply. I understand what you're saying, though. You know, if you're working in the civil service, you're there to be impartial, apolitical. You're there to implement government policy, and you have to do it as flawlessly and seamlessly as possible. But that doesn't mean that you don't then have the right to also object. But maybe it should be a case of resignation as opposed to going and strike. You know, if I was morally objecting to something and, you know, I had taken whatever oath it is that they take or whatever they have to kind of declare when they start working, maybe resignation would be the best way around it. It's a very, very, very complex one, to be honest.
Really, really is.
Sean, what about illegal fire sticks in the sun?
Right, illegal fire sticks. So we've had 5 people jailed for, I think, a total of 30 years for illegal football streams. I mean, where do you kind of begin with that to unpack that? I mean, first of all, I think it is a heavy, heavy penalty to pay. I mean, they did make a lot of money. It says they've raked in about £7.2 million from about 50,000 subscribers. But then the question is that I immediately start to think of is that is such a heavy sentence compared to a lot of other things we see. This is low-hanging fruit. I'm not trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator, but you do see people being jailed for minimal jail sentences, custodial sentences, sometimes a slap in the wrist for child sex offences. Something you would consider to be the most grave and horrendous thing that you could possibly carry out. And you then start to think, well, where does the balance of interest and priority lie? And it's when you see that the government are losing out on taxation and that private companies are losing out on money. I'm not for a second saying that it's right, but I just think, is this proportionate? Is this what we should be seeing? I would say no.
OK, Sean, Candice, we've got to leave it there, I'm afraid, but you're going to be back in the next hour and we've got lots more to go through with you then. Thank you very, very much.
Everyone knows what our children eat affects how they feel, but how can making healthier and more mindful choices help manage compulsive eating, binging and weight gain.
Well, this morning we're joined by senior counselling psychologist Dr. Amara Nassim, who's here to tell us more about how we can encourage children to develop healthy eating habits. Good morning to you. Really, really good to see you this morning. Really interesting. We were having a conversation earlier about the cost of living and how cheap food is often the most unhealthy. There's another side to this coin, isn't there, Dr. Amara, where the cost of living and the stresses that people are under right now might lead to them actually craving junk food as comfort?
Yes, absolutely. It's a good point. And unfortunately, that tends to be what's cheaper and more affordable. So education around nutrition and what's good for the body and food is really important. I think it's missing in a component of the curriculum in school as well for children and for parents. But yeah, binge eating and stress eating go hand in hand, definitely.
There's obviously a huge emotional attachment to food with a lot of people. Yes, so
the environment.
The
environment of the home, if it's stressful, can also lend itself to children wanting to emotionally eat or be, driven towards eating junk food as well because of stress. And it's marketed at children. It's marketed very well. Junk food high refined in sugar, food that's not so healthy for us. It really has an effect on our mental health and well-being, and actually on the function of the brain and the brain's ability to perform as well.
How can you recognise when a child, or anyone really, is emotionally eating?
So the parents are obviously in a great position. The more time you spend with your child, the more you're able to notice if they're being different in terms of their habits, if there's any secret eating going on, if you notice any sort of different behaviours at meal times, if you notice food's going missing. And it's really important to be able to approach your children gently about this issue and voice your concerns for them, and noticing that they've changed in terms of their behaviours, that you're concerned and curious about their well-being. Has anything going on for them that you don't know about? So try to have the conversation with them as soon as possible, as soon as you've noticed that they're having issues with food and your concerns for them. And maybe keep the conversation away from around food and weight, appearance in general, and more about their well-being and their moods.
There has to be a balance, right? You look at different cultures. For example, I grew up in a Greek family where for us it was all about, if you're not eating everything on your plate and the second plate, something's wrong with you, and that's what we were told. What's wrong? They only ate 3 pieces of lamb and, they need another 10. And that's how it was for us. So then we grew up thinking, passing it down to our kids, I'm thinking, they're not eating enough, and facing the opposite problem. In your opinion, what does that mean? Because if you're taught one thing and now do you not think it's a balance? It's being able to sort of teach your children and talk to them about what's good, but also not restrict them too much on everything, on the things that you think are not great or you think are too bad for them?
No, of course, it's a really good point, Peter. It's, so our social well-being and our emotional health is tied to our culture, the culture we're brought up in, the culture we live in. So food is an important part of that, how we connect, how we celebrate, how we come together. And that's a really good point. Role modelling from the parents is super important. What they do is what the children will absorb, and that will become their values. And what they then do and take into adulthood is habits. So coming together and enjoying food and being taught how to do that in a healthy way. All food is good in moderation. It's about how we eat things. It's about creating balance. And that involves also eating things and being careful to label them just as treats, right? All food is good for us if we eat it in a balanced and moderated way. And it starts with what we teach our children. So culturally, of course, it's okay to eat, more at times than what we usually would. And that is also modeled to children how we do it, that's what they pick up on. So it's a really important point. It's not labeling things as good and bad. Like, everything's good if we eat it in the right way, in the right manner.
That's so interesting that you shouldn't label foods as good or bad foods, because I know growing up, I had a big Irish family, so similar to you, whereas if you don't eat everything, you're rude. You're rude to your host if you don't finish all the food on your plate. So that's really interesting not to label it as good or bad, or food as a treat as well. And on that note, food as a treat, what are your thoughts on diet culture? And speaking about being on a diet or watching your weight as an adult in front of children, does that have an impact on them and their relationship with food?
Yes, of course. So children see what you do and they absorb the language around food, they absorb the emotional environment around food as well. So if we're talking about being on diets or food being good or bad or missing dinner or counting calories, children will see that and model their behaviour on what you do and think that's quite normal. And actually that we're not wanting to teach that to children. We want to teach them everything's okay in moderation. We want to balance eating. We want to eat enough of the right ingredients. There's key food groups, and if we omit any one of them, that really has a detrimental effect on their well-being, how their brain functions and their mood, and it predisposes them to things like anxiety and depression. So it's really important to be careful around what we're teaching our children, attitudes towards food and the language around food.
Dr. Amara Naseem, really, really good to talk to you this morning. We could talk to you all morning, couldn't we? Absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, coming up, ITV faces a probe by MPs amid reports the channel paid off Philip Schofield's young lover.
But first, Greg Dewhurst has your Wednesday forecast.
Hello there, welcome to our latest broadcast for GB News. I'm Greg Dewhurst. It's looking largely dry, settled over the next few days, plenty of sunshine, particularly in the west. Looking at the bigger picture, high pressure sits to the northwest of the UK, keeping everything settled, but a little bit of a keen northeasterly breeze for some eastern and southern coasts will just take the edge off the temperatures, particularly where it stays a little bit cloudy. And it's quite a cloudy start out there this morning, particularly across central and eastern areas, best of the sunshine across western Scotland, Northern Ireland. But through the day, the clouds should slowly lift and break. But just notice how it does stay cloudier than the recent days across central swathes of the UK, parts of southern Wales, the Midlands may stay cloudy all day. And where we keep the cloud, temperatures really struggling, 16, 17 Celsius. But in the best of the sunshine, the low 20s, perhaps even around 25 degrees across western Scotland. Some sunshine breaking out across southern counties of England too. So a fine end to the day across the west. Eastern areas still dry, plenty of weather to enjoy, but it is on the cloudier side. And then through the early hours, we'll see that cloud sweep back westwards as we move towards dawn. Temperatures holding up, generally 9 to 11 Celsius, some clearer skies across the northwest. But this is where we'll see the sunniest start to Thursday. Northern Ireland, western Scotland, elsewhere quite a grey start, some drizzle in the wind possible. But through the day, the clouds should lift and break, hopefully push a little bit further eastwards compared to Wednesday. So sunnier skies, most likely Wales down into the West Country. And this is where we'll see the highest temperatures getting into the low 20s. Still under the clouds, some struggling across eastern coast around 12 or 13 degrees. And then to end the week and into the weekend, plenty of sunshine to come. In fact, perhaps more sunshine for the vast majority of the UK. And temperatures above average, still reaching the low 20s, though perhaps a little chilly at night.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
ITV bosses will be grilled by MPs amid reports that Philip Schofield's young lover was paid off by the channel.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock on Wednesday the 31st of May. This is Breakfast on GB News with Ellie Costello and Peter Andre.
Here's what's leading the news this morning. And ITV executives will face televised questioning by MPs over how they handled Philip Schofield's affair with a younger male colleague. It comes as the Prince's Trust charity drops the presenter as an ambassador, saying it was no longer appropriate to work together.
Ministers are facing accusations of a cover-up after it refused to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages to the pandemic inquiry. The government have been given an extension, with the unredacted files now due at 4 p.m. tomorrow.
Artificial intelligence could wipe out humanity. That's the warning from industry leaders in a joint statement in which they compare the threat to nuclear war and pandemics. The Prime Minister confirmed yesterday he's in talks with world leaders about managing the danger it poses.
And with the NHS at breaking point and soaring food costs pushing people towards less healthy options, obesity has never been a more pressing issue. We'll take a look at what can be done to solve it and how we can stop our children making the same mistakes.
Lots of you getting in touch this morning. Thank you so much. Do keep them coming in. gbviews@gbnews.com. Lots of you getting in touch about our debate earlier, aren't they, Pete?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got Helen here saying on the beach it's OK for men to go topless, in the park, but please not at Tesco's. I don't know if other supermarkets apply, but apparently Tesco's.
Tesco's is the line.
Yeah.
Richard says, in my view, the human body looks better covered up. Period.
Linda says, personally, I don't like seeing the men who look like the Michelin Man walking around topless with masses of hair on their back and chest.
Do you know what, Linda? I'm with you on that. I hate it, especially when you're on holiday and you're trying to have an ice lolly or eat your lunch on the beach and all you can see is hairy back or hairy chest of the man on a sunbed near you. Oh, it's awful. Alexa says, I think if you're comfortable with your body, why not go topless?
And we always must listen to what Alexa says.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
Angela says, totally agree that tops should be kept on. I've been in pubs where a man was shirtless. It's disrespectful and disgusting.
OK, Brian says there comes an age whereby men really shouldn't be walking around without a T-shirt. And that is so interesting because this is what we were discussing earlier, right?
Yeah. And I mean, how could I be the one to say I agree when I used to do it for a living?
Yes,
Unbelievable.
Pete's really interesting because obviously Pete is known for his topless shenanigans, but now you don't agree with it.
Yeah, probably because I don't look as good. No, I'm just joking. For me, it's not that. It's the fact that I think I realise now the double standards. You know, as you get older, you just see things a little bit differently. And when I see someone with their shirt off, I'm like, come on, mate. Put your shirt back on. And then how could I... It feels hypocritical, it really does, but hey, times change.
But it shows growth as well, right? Because as you say, this is something that you used to make a living from. Look at you there, look at you go.
Tell you what, you see the hairstyle there?
Yeah.
I used to put so much lacquer on those bits at the front that when I used to drink my tea, I had to move the hair and dip in my tea because the tea would taste like lacquer. I'm not even joking. I know, unbelievable.
Oh dear, well there's the inside scoop there for you. Amazing, absolutely brilliant. Do keep your views coming in on any of the stories that we're talking about today. We are touching on obesity, so I'll just share a couple of those. Amelia says, personally, I think the government are largely to blame for the obesity epidemic. Unless they do something about food prices, then you'll be paying out a lot to treat obesity-related health issues.
And Chris says, some people have thyroid issues, but let's face it, this accounts for a tiny percentage of obese people. Lack of exercise and eating too much makes you fat. It's that simple. However, the cost of living crisis will make the nation fatter because many people are not only eating cheaper snacks, but they're eating whatever they can find.
Yeah, exactly. And just to say, people are very, very excited to see Peter Andre here this morning. Karen says, loving Peter Andre on the news today, really enjoying the programme. Julie says, hi, Ellie and Peter, you've absolutely made my day. And Neil says, hi, Peter, surprised to see you this morning. Great to have you on board, mate. You're doing a brilliant job.
Thank you, thank you.
So people are very, very happy to see you this morning. Do keep your views coming in on any of the stories that we're talking about. gbviews@gbnews.com. Now to our top story, and ITV bosses will face questions from MPs over how much they knew of Philip Schofield's affair following claims that his lover was paid off by the channel.
The Daily Mail has reported that the younger man received a financial settlement from the broadcaster before being moved to a different daytime programme within the organisation.
Well, meanwhile, former ITV presenter, now GB News breakfast host Eamonn Holmes spoke to Dan Wootton for part 2 of an explosive sit-down in which he addressed the controversy around so-called Q-Gate.
They were there to make a film on the Queen's funeral. Now, unless there's any documentary evidence of this, I would put it to you that is another lie. So Philip Schofield admits he lies. ITV lie. The place is a den of iniquity, an absolute den of iniquity.
Which brings us to that night at the National Television Awards where everything changed. And then lo and behold, Eamonn, just a few days later, you're asked, out of the blue, confronted, ambushed, you might say, to reveal that Philip was going to come out as gay. So what happened that night at the National Television Awards from your perspective, and how did it lead on to Philip coming out?
So anyway, he comes into our dressing room and he falls down on his knees. I mean, the acting is amazing. You know, he falls down on his knees crying. And I said to him, what's the matter? What's the matter? I'm gay. I'm gay. And I walked over and I said, is that all? So we then began to feel there was a certain line being patted here. We said, no, I know what I'm going to say. Us believing the truth is that Philip is revealing he's gay and coming out. And Ruth ad-libs without any autocue or anything else. I just decided at this point, not sure. I'm just beginning to feel bad vibes about this. I think I'm not saying anything. Then it goes to those two in their choreographed way, knowing how false they are. I'm sure they rehearsed it for days as to what they were going to say and do and who was going to hug. And Holly was very specific about where she sat, where Philip sat, where Ruth sat, where I sat. It was all choreographed, right?
So this has been planned for some time.
It's been planned for some time. And it was all a bit weird. At that stage, though, I believed he was gay, and that's what he was coming out, and that was the information we were given. We were lied to, and Ruth and I, to this day, are embarrassed and ashamed when we see those pictures, when we see the toils that some people who are tortured by their sexuality have to go through. And this man, was this a cover-up for something else?
And so what about brand this morning? We're going to speak to our publicity coach, Maya Riaz. What do you think about Eamonn's allegations?
Shocking. Hugely damaging, isn't it? And it's come right from inside. He knows, he's been on the show and he's speaking out. It's absolutely shocking. And ITV need to deal with this. It can't be brushed under the carpet anymore. It's away from Philip now. It's about the toxicity that went on. And especially for a brand that's all about kindness, it's proven not to be kind. You know, they have adverts talking about kindness. And actually, we see the damage, like what happened to Caroline Flack when you're in TV in that industry. So they do need to address it properly. And I'm glad they're going to Parliament next week to talk about this.
Well, that's going to be really interesting, isn't it, Mayor? Because they are going to face questioning by MPs. They're going to be asked about what they knew about the affair and also about how they handled it. So we've only had statements so far, but this is going to be televised, isn't it? Yeah. It's going to be box office stuff. Everybody's going to be watching this.
All eyes. And the statement we've had, Ellie, we're not believing because they said there was an investigation. Well, clearly not, because, look, Philip admitted he lied. There was an affair. They said there was an investigation. Clearly it didn't go deep enough. So, yes, everyone's going to be watching it. And all eyes on Holly next week on Monday when she comes back.
I mean, you were right that what you said about the whole mental health thing and you know, ITV have been very, very much in the forefront of promoting Be Kind, and this seems to be a question mark, a big question mark around the mental health of the young lover.
That's important to stress. There's two people at the heart of this. A huge global icon, TV figure, Philip Schofield. He's gone from right to the top. Look, you know this game, Peter. There's no manual for fame, and there's certainly no manual when you fall like he has.
But obviously, a lot of it still, there's hearsay on some of the things, there's speculation, you know, we're sort of being guided by what we're reading every day. So we don't actually, a lot of us, most of us, don't know the true facts yet.
No, absolutely. So there's the mental health of the young person that you mentioned. And look, he hasn't been protected by this. He's in hiding. There's a bounty on his head. Everyone's after his side of the story. So far, he's been protected by the papers. His name isn't in all the papers that we read. Online there is. So, and Philip's mental health as well. And, you know, he opens the papers, he sees himself, he turns on the TV, he's all over it. His DMs, no doubt, everyone's got an opinion because everyone's got an interest in their story. So I worry about both of their mental health. We've seen what happens when you're in the media storm and this story is going and going on. And there's no end to it, is there?
The saga does continue. I wanted to ask you about the front page of The Sun this morning, Mayor. This is Defiant Holly back on Monday. Now, do you think she will be wanting to come back to This Morning? As you said, the brand is damaged now. It is that family-friendly, warm show. And Holly herself, she stands for that wholesome girl next door image, doesn't she? Do you think she'll be back?
She needs to be back. She hasn't done anything wrong, has she? It can't be trial by association. You know, we have to believe her statement. She didn't know, and she needs to come back because if she doesn't, then there's speculations about her hiding it. So I think she needs to. What she says and what ITV bosses would want her to say are two different things. She is a big brand name herself. We've seen her do presenting away, so they're not like Ant and Dec where they can't be without each other. She's done presenting away from Phil. She's got a lucrative commercial deals and a great career as well.
It's a really interesting point because she also, if you look at the flip side, it's also This Morning that have given her this huge platform. So she, you know, she feels a loyalty, I'm sure, on all sides. So, thank you for that.
Mayor Riaz, really good to see you in the studio this morning. Thank you so much for your analysis. It is interesting, and you two totally agree, don't you, that that Holly can actually go it alone.
She can, and I understand her reservations about leaving or staying. Both kind of make sense to do with her brand.
They do. Well, let us know what you think at home. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Leading tech giants have warned that mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority.
Well, it comes as the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says the UK can play a leadership role in the regulation of using AI. Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, has more.
From the founders of Google's AI efforts to the creators of ChatGPT, some of the top minds in the tech industry have issued a stark warning.
We are working to build tools that one day can help us make new discoveries and address some of humanity's biggest challenges, like climate change and curing cancer. We think that regulatory intervention by governments will be critical to mitigate the risks of increasingly powerful models.
They claim that mitigating the risk of human extinction from AI should be a global priority.
Hi, I know what you're thinking. What a good-looking robot.
The statement released by the Centre for AI Safety comes amid rising concerns over the power and potential dangers of artificial intelligence. Critics worry that without proper oversight and regulation, these advanced technologies could either be exploited by bad actors or veer out of control. The speed of AI development has been astonishing. OpenAI's GPT-4 can now pass the bar exam. The risk of godlike artificial intelligence, far cleverer than human beings, could lead to a being that disregards the value of human life, or is unaligned with human values. It might sound like science fiction, but tech leaders are worried.
When they say AGI, what they mean is godlike intelligence. They mean systems that are so vastly beyond human intelligence. They're like gods. They can solve all kinds of science. They can trick humans. They can deceive. They could, develop new technologies. They could outsmart humans. They could hack any computer systems. This is the thing that these people truly think is possible and that they are building towards. 2% risk of killing literally everybody? No, I'm not taking that risk.
The other form of risk comes from powerful AI that can create medicines in seconds, being used by bad actors or terrorists to create bioweapons. Imagine a synthetic pathogen with the transmissibility of COVID, but the morbidity of Ebola. In response to these risks, the G7 has established a working group on AI, with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak wanting to spearhead these efforts. He's calling for the establishment of legislative guardrails to mitigate AI risks.
AI clearly can bring massive benefits to the economy and society, and you've seen that recently, where it's helping paralysed people to walk, discovering new antibiotics, but we need to make sure that this is done in a way that is safe and is secure.
This is not a partisan issue. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting is singing from the same hymn sheet as the Prime Minister.
Labour wants to see Britain playing a leading role on the global stage in relation to AI development and regulation, and that's the role I think this country can play.
With tech leaders and now politicians raising the alarm, it's clear that the race isn't just to build the most advanced AI, but to ensure that its rise doesn't precipitate our own fall.
And Tom Harwood joins us now. Good morning. What are your thoughts on what Rishi's saying about the benefits, the pros and the cons of AI?
It's a fascinating debate because on the one hand, this is incredible technology that's advancing at a pace that even people in the leadership field of this, the sort of tech experts, could not have imagined that we are where we are today, where, let's not forget, AI can pass the bar exam. AI can explain why a political cartoon is funny just by looking at the image. We are at an incredible moment in terms of the advancement of this technology and particularly the pace at which it's advancing. Now, that presents some huge benefits to humanity. We're discovering new cures for diseases. We might even start entering sort of the realm of science fiction. Could we discover some sort of immortality, stop us aging? Could we cure all disease? Could we stop climate change? All of these amazing things are sort of potentially at our fingertips. But on the other hand, on the other side of the ledger, we're creating this very, very intelligent technology that at the moment could possibly be on a par with humans,
but the cognitive ability, if you like, of this technology is advancing at what many describe as at an exponential level, sort of perhaps doubling or quadrupling in power and reach each year. And that means that this technology could go beyond our understanding, so-called black box AI tech, where we don't really know how it works, or potentially what it's even thinking. And that presents some real risks to society. Could bad actors, like terrorists, use tech that is designed to make medicines to make weapons? Or could AI have a mind of its own and, in sort of a slightly science fiction type way, sort of disregard the value of human life in its own goals, it being unaligned to human goals? These are some big risks that only now politicians in the US, in the UK, and at the G7 a couple of weeks ago have started to talk about.
Absolutely, Tom, and it is terrifying. I mean, the front page of The Eye this morning is exactly what you're talking about. AI creators fear the extinction of humanity. And it is that fear, isn't it, about the pace of change? Because how can you possibly regulate AI? How can you legislate over AI? We were talking earlier about how long it takes and how laborious it is to write this legislation. Well, by the time we've written legislation, then, as you say, it's going to have doubled and quadrupled. It's impossible to stay ahead of the curve.
This statement is a landmark moment. It came out yesterday around lunchtime from the CEO of Google DeepMind, of OpenAI, the people behind ChatGPT, but also the godfather of AI, a guy called Geoffrey Hinton. About 300 leading tech figures have signed this statement, which interestingly compares the risks of AI to nuclear war and pandemics. And in that, there is a sort of sense of how things might move. Nuclear technology in this world is governed by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now, if you can muddle around with the acronym that is, that's the IAEA. Lots of letters. You can imagine something similar with AI. Like the International Atomic Energy Agency, you could imagine something that sort of, for the most powerful AI, is a sort of global effort to almost constrain the most powerful form of research, what's called AGI research, this sort of general intelligence, not AI designed to do a specific thing, but AI that sort of is designed to do anything. And that power does worry some people as well as excite others.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, and you know, we've seen how when things get in the wrong hands, what it can do. That's before AI technology.
And the real risk here is that the way that AI is being developed now is these scientists don't know how it works. The way that it's generated is they make algorithms that then produce algorithms, that then produce algorithms. And so by the time you end up with the product, it's known as a black box product because we don't know how it's made because a bot has written the code for the bot. Wow. And then that creates some big risks and some big legislative challenges.
OK, Tom Harwood, really good to see you this morning. Thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Now, the time is 21 minutes past 8. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories.
Rail passengers are facing more travel disruption amid further strike action, with train companies warning services will be severely reduced. Members of the drivers' union, ASLEF, will walk out today and Saturday, while the RMT union is holding industrial action this Friday.
Customers on prepayment meters are being urged to avoid missing out on £400 worth of support with their energy bills. All households were eligible for the government's Energy Bills Support Scheme, which was paid in 6 instalments over the winter. But with £130 million still available to be claimed, households are being urged to redeem their vouchers before the deadline on the 30th of June.
British stars of the hit show Ted Lasso have joined picket lines in LA amid the ongoing Hollywood writers' strike. Hannah Waddington, Nick Mohammed, James Lance and Jeremy Swift were spotted holding placards outside the Warner Brothers studios. Over 11,500 members of the Writers Guild of America have been on strike since the start of the month.
Now do stay with us because we're going to have all of the latest sport as Serena Wiegmann prepares to pick her squad for the 2023 Women's World Cup. Paul Coit has all the details. That's next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Dubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The time is 8:26. Still lots to come on today's programme. After New York City moves to make obesity a protected characteristic alongside race and gender, at 8:45 we're going to ask if it's okay to ever call someone fat.
And at 9:20 we'll speak to former so-called ASBRO who faced jail as a young man but has now turned his life around and wants to help others do the same.
And remember, you can join in any of our discussions this morning by emailing gbviews@gbnews.com. We do love to hear from you.
Right, it's time to chat through some of the biggest sports stories with broadcaster Paul Coyte. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Peter? It's good to see you.
Not as good as seeing you.
Oh, now, come on. Yeah, I like that. Very good.
Thanks.
Now, listen, I've got to tell you I'm a bit worried about Harry Kane. Now, Harry Kane, obviously the England captain, Spurs talisman, and People are trying to sell him off, and the thing is, I'm seeing it in the paper everywhere. As soon as Harry Kane... look, we're about a year away now until his contract runs out at Tottenham. He's the finest. I will always defend him because I love him, and he's the greatest striker there is in the world, without any doubt. But it's about where he is going to go. Now, I'm hopeful that he's going to stay at Spurs. And as would every... You're making a face at me like it's not...
But is he going to, Paul? I don't think so.
You don't think so? See, the thing is...
Well, everyone
it's
wants...
where he can go. See, this is the thing. It's where he can go. He's very much a family man and another child on the way, and it's not something where he would want to up, I imagine, and go and move abroad. So that would rule out your Barcelonas and Real Madrids, etc. Also, Arsenal is out of the question. Being the Spurs legend, he wouldn't dream of doing that. Chelsea, unlikely as well, because he's very true to Spurs. It only really leaves one club, with it's Manchester City, of Erling Haaland, who we know how amazing he is, and they've already got their centre forward. So it looks like the only other place is Manchester United. Now, the rumours is that he would like to make that move, but if he goes there, it guarantees nothing. Because Manchester United, it doesn't guarantee that he's going to win something. Because this is what it's all about. You've got all these pundits are going around going, oh well, you know, how can Harry Kane be happy with his career when he's not actually won any trophies? Already, he's Spurs' record goal scorer. He's already England's record goal scorer, and within a year or so, he'll be the greatest goal scorer the Premier League has ever seen. So, as far as I'm concerned, who needs medals for winning?
And
you know what I mean?
He's still only 29, isn't he?
Yeah, 29.
So
yeah,
still lots more
just
to
about
come.
to turn 30. So everybody is trying to sell off Harry, but whether he's going to go, I mean, it's a matter of you either keep him at Spurs, and then he could go on a free transfer, but keep him for the last year, and then maybe things will change there, or you cash in and sell now. But I think most people would have preferred he stayed at Spurs.
Now, talking of selling off, Chelsea is selling off their players.
That's right.
The question is where and how much they're going to make.
Yeah, because Mauricio Pochettino has come in. He starts officially on July the 1st. There's all the announcement that he's come in, but we haven't seen him yet. The main reason, I think, is because he's still being paid by PSG, and so July the 1st will be the date. Now, they've so many players. Todd Boehly, who bought Chelsea, it was like, oh, we'll have him, or we'll have him. How much? I'll pay $2 billion for him. It's like crazy, just buying everybody that he can see. So where we are at the moment is that there's too many players, and Pochettino has got to start whittling them down. Now, he is, I imagine, is one of these managers that would come in and then want to see everybody and want to meet everybody. So it's not a matter of selling them immediately. One of them is João Felix, who's a midfielder who's come on loan. So he will probably be going back to Atletico Madrid. But then it's a matter of whittling them down, selling them off. But where do they go to and how much do they go for? And where a lot of clubs that want to buy these players will be thinking, you know what, we could get a bargain here. So it is. It's going to be pretty much a bargain basement there at Chelsea. So that's
OK. What about Women's World Cup?
Yes, the Lionesses. Well, we're going to Australia. It's only 50 days away now. What was this? Was this like, come on, Australia? You wait till we get to the Ashes. I'll tell you, that's when it's going to start getting feisty. 50 days to the Women's World Cup in Australia. Serena Wiegmann, so she will announce her 23-player squad today. Beth Mead of Arsenal, one of the greatest players that this country's produced, ruptured an ACL. That was back in November, and that's the big worry, is whether she's going to be fit. You know, she was one away from winning the Ballon d'Or just a few months ago, so second greatest player in the world. But we need her to be fit, but we don't know whether she will be. So that is a worry.
OK, and just very quickly, tell us the latest with the Ashes.
Well, latest with the Ashes, we're playing, obviously, Australia. How do you feel about that?
I'm standing in between you two for this.
I know. So it depends on who you speak to is how you feel about how it goes.
Yeah, well.
OK, well, we'll see. England have been great so far, but England play Ireland tomorrow, and tomorrow Josh Tongue will make his debut playing for England, so he's a seam bowler. So basically, he'll come in tomorrow. It's all about the Ashes in a couple of weeks, so that's when it's just a warm-up for the Ashes against Ireland.
Don't underestimate the Australians. Right.
I would never dream of it, Peter. Never dream of it.
Coity, thanks so much.
Thank you.
We love to see you.
Thank you very much. Right, stay with us and we'll ask if grannies are the best when it comes to keeping children healthy. Going through the papers with Sean McDonald and Candace Holdsworth. Next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back. The time is 8:36. Let's bring you up to date with today's front pages.
The Telegraph leads with the government's so-called cover-up row after it refused to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages as part of the COVID inquiry.
The Mail says AI could wipe out humanity as tech bosses say the threat must be tackled.
The Express reports MPs have demanded the sacking of civil servants who planned strike action over deporting migrants to Rwanda.
And finally, The Sun believes that Holly Willoughby is preparing to make her return to This Morning. She'll be coming back on Monday. Well, let's go inside the papers now with broadcaster and host of the Blethered podcast, Sean McDonald, and writer and commentator Candice Holdsworth. Really good to see you both this morning. And Sean, we'll start with you. You've got a top story from Scotland for us, an exclusive.
Yes, a major story developing north of the border. Actually happened this time again, this exact time last year. It's my mum's birthday. So want to take the opportunity to wish my mum, Tracy, a happy birthday. To apologise for being such a pain and to tell you that I love you and happy birthday, and I hope you have a great day.
Happy birthday, Tracy. Oh, there's some lovely photos.
Yeah, that's her and I out for lunch. She often gets mistaken for my sister. She'll love that.
Does she?
Although Pete said he's old enough to be my dad.
I am. Well, can I ask? It's rude to ask how old your mum is, but you may as well tell us. Well, you don't want to say, do you? OK. Is she similar to my age?
Yeah.
Right, how?
She could be, but I think we could pass for brothers.
So I could be your dad. Thanks for that. I feel really great now.
Well, I think you look younger than me, though.
Ah, you know what to say. She brought you up well.
These two are having a right bromance, aren't you?
Sean, I wanted to talk to you about what's in the sun today, about expensive coffee. This is a subject close to my heart.
Me too, we're both coffee fanatics, but you've got Co-op stores across the UK, they're replacing £10 jars of coffee with empty ones to thwart thieves. Now, on the surface, that's the story, but let's dig deep, let's go beyond that. First of all, coffee should not be costing £10.
No.
So that's rampant profiteering, which has to be curtailed. We speak about that often on the show, and the government should be intervening to... I think there may be some measures being put in place or proposed. That should not be costing that. I think it's a really sad indictment of where we are today as a society with the cost of living crisis, that you're having to put empty jars of coffee, and it says, the label on it says, "This product is a dummy, not for sale. Please ask a member of staff for help." You know, you'd expect that would be a really expensive item, but not for a staple. And some people may then say, "Oh, well, you know, don't have coffee if you can't afford it." I would say that, sweep that aside, that's nonsense, you know. People should be allowed to have a mug of instant coffee in the morning. So that's where we are. That is a reflection of how far we've fallen, and it's sad. We're in a position where, you know, it's not going to affect us too much, but I'm consciously aware that there are people, and I was once in that position, where I would have looked at that and went, "Oh, I can't buy that," and I'll never forget that, and I'll never stop speaking out on behalf of those people.
Well, coffee is one of those things that you notice now, don't you? When you go into a shop, as you say, £5–10 now for a jar of instant coffee. It's along your butter that's over £5.
Yeah.
What do you think, Sean, about the idea of a price cap? I know the government are mooting that at the moment, a price cap on everyday items such as bread, milk and butter.
Yeah, I thought I'd seen that sort of floated somewhere. I think that is a... The government should be looking after its citizens. The government should kind of be stepping in, and it is rampant profiteering. And you also see a constant fluctuation of prices. One day I'll go to Greek yoghurt or something I always buy. One day it's a £5, then the next day it's £2.50. And again, it doesn't affect me. I can do it, but I always think, I always remember in the front of my mind, walking around Asda, doing sums in my head, being like, can I afford to get this? And, you know, that's part of being 20, 21 and maybe spending my money too much on going out or whatever.
In a bar, yeah.
But I remember that feeling, and the fact that there's people that are going through that today, it's not on. So the government should be stepping in. I'm glad to see that has been proposed.
I mean, and it feeds into our conversation that we've been having all day, really, about obesity and how the cheapest food is often the most unhealthy.
Yes, and when people are struggling, they will often go for things like the value meals, and, you know, things like butter. I mean, they've just gone up so much in price, and that is such a staple. But actually, I think there's a lot more research now. Things like butter. Butter's actually better for you than things like margarine. People always used to say, oh, margarine's more healthy. But we actually know now it isn't. It's actually better to use butter in moderation.
So that's the key, isn't it? Everything in moderation.
Absolutely. Candice, the Metro talks about a mum of boy killed in dog attacks and calls for law.
Yes. So this is a really sad story. So Emma Whitfield, her 10-year-old son, Jack Liss, was killed in 2021 by an American bully breed.
Yeah.
The owner of that dog was actually jailed for 4.5 years, so it shows probably a very irresponsible owner. And she's calling for much tighter restrictions on dog owners. And I think there's a lot of people saying this now because these dogs are being linked to many attacks, many fatal attacks. It can be an emotive issue. People are loyal to their breeds. You know, people say it's not the dog, it's not the dog, it's the owner. But then I think that strengthens the argument then for tighter licenses for dog owners. Maybe you need to go on a course. If you're going to own a dog like that, you have to understand that dog, you have to understand how it behaves, and we need to know who is breeding these dogs. So we don't want any more children being attacked.
And you can't forget that dogs, like all animals, have instincts.
Exactly.
And you can't always predict the most loving and caring animal might react in a certain way if provoked.
Yes, and the thing is we do buy dogs for their nature. You know, I love spaniels, for instance, and that's why, they're my favourite dogs. That's why I bought this, why I got the spaniel, because they are a certain way. So I don't think we can ignore their nature. Sometimes people do like to gloss over that a bit, but it's absolutely true that certain dogs behave a certain way.
So what do you think? Mandatory training, licensing? What do you make, Sean?
Yeah, I think with anything you'd be looking at sort of regulation and basically I don't want to say a clamping down, but I think there are too many unregulated people maybe selling dogs, or there should be mandatory training for certain breeds. And I accept the point that people say that they talk about pit bulls and stuff, that they have great nature, and yeah, I'm sure that's the case, but there probably has to be a baseline, because when kids are losing their lives, maybe it has to be just a base regulation.
OK, The Guardian talks about Moscow hit by drones.
Yes, so Moscow was yesterday targeted with a large-scale drone attack, which the Russians are actually playing down. I think that's maybe from a propagandist perspective, so they don't appear to be weak or kind of at risk. Video footage posted on social media showed drones being exploding in fields outside of Moscow, surface-to-air missiles taking them out on the outskirts of Moscow. The Russian Defence Ministry said it was 8 drones that were shot down, but even Russian journalists are kind of speculating and saying that it was a lot more. But I think the serious implication of this now is Vladimir Putin is saying that they have every right to robustly and aggressively defend their safety. He's made the assertion or the claim that, he said, unlike us, the Ukrainians are trying to instill terror and fear in the Russian people by attacking civilians in public areas, whereas we are using very precise missiles. We know that to be a lie. So whether this did happen, whether it's a false flag attack, I think it did the way it's been reported, but it's music to Putin's ears, because he's now able to sort of facilitate that and use it as a measure to say, look what they're doing, let's push forward. So it's just going to see a further escalation of the conflict.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're probably right. Candice, let's end with this story, this great story in the Times this morning, that grannies are the best at keeping children healthy.
Yeah, so this story caught my eye in the Times. So it was research taken out by the Max Planck Biological Institute, and they looked at children born between 1761 and 1900, and they found that if they had a grandmother living in the house, they had much better health outcomes. So they think it's linked to just extra care, granny's knowledge about things, you know, spotting things early on, nutrition. And I mean, obviously, we're in a very different context now. We've got, you know, medical science, but we all know how valuable grannies are. I mean, I don't know what I would have done without my mum and my mother-in-law when I had children. I mean, they were there for me, and they obviously had so much confidence, and they could pass that on to me.
And what can they offer that perhaps a parent wouldn't have? What's the additional benefit of having a grandparent around?
I think they sort of have an emotional connection with children, like just in a very easygoing way. So, you know, you're trying to get kids ready for school, and, you know, you're getting their meals ready, and it's sort of like you're organising their lives. Whereas grannies, you know, they can just relax with them and help them just sort of develop who they are and do nice crafts with them. And my son absolutely adores his granny, adores her.
They always say it's like a second double love.
Yes.
When the parent's child has a child. But we're missing out granddads here too. They're important too.
They are important.
Granddads are important too, but
they
grandmums.
absolutely are. They are. My father-in-law was just invaluable as well. I mean, the amount that he did. I mean, he took the dog for a walk every single day when I had a newborn in my arms.
Yeah, I think there's probably something to say about, I'm thinking of my grandparents now, and where your parents do the disciplining, I think you were touching upon there, Candice, they have to do the everyday parenting, whereas the grandparents just love you and they just, you do fun things together. What do you think, Sean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, my gran and grandpa are really important to me. I see my grandpa all the time. Actually, might give him a shout out as well.
Yeah, do you want to do that?
All the family are getting a wee mention.
Let's do it.
I see him every few days, though. We go for coffee and lunch. He's like my best pal. Love him. Love my gran as well, by the way.
If you can find the coffee.
Yeah, God, I know.
Yeah, well, there's that, isn't there? Sean, Candice, really good to see you this morning. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. With a third of British children being overweight or obese by the time they leave primary school, it's never been more important to talk to our kids about food and nutrition.
But should the word fat ever be used to describe those who are on the heavier side? And you and I disagree on this one, don't we?
I do disagree. Sorry.
Pete thinks we need to be very careful about the way that we speak to overweight people. I think that it's just a technical term. But let's speak...
I'm ready for this.
Yeah, let's speak to weight loss expert Steve Miller and nutritionist Rhiannon Lambert, who both say the word fat is OK to encourage healthy eating habits. This is fabulous news. You're both on my side. Let's start with you, Rhiannon. You're a nutritionist and an author. So why don't you think fat is a bad word necessarily and we are OK to use it?
I think, first of all, thank you for having this discussion, because I do think that we need to be compassionate and kind in the way we use the term. Now, I think it's okay to use descriptive words, and I do think if we start banning words and use language in a certain way, it can have such a negative impact on shaping young minds. And, I'm a parent myself, and I would dread to think of any negative language pointed towards my children. But I think it's okay to use these terms if they're used in a factual, correct way, where we're not being negative with a fat bias, if that makes sense. Because a lot of people, I think, use it to bring about shame, to bring about guilt. And actually, if we just accept that, some people are larger than others, it's okay to have different body shapes and sizes. And it's the way the word fat is used. But, nutritionally speaking, our diets play a huge role here. We know that, 73% of the public, according to research I looked at by California Almonds, don't really know what's going on their diets. They experience gut issues, and there's a lot of stuff here we need to discuss, because nutritional education is key.
I mean, I don't normally like the fact that over time we have to change words that we've been using forever. But on this, I do think that, with bullying and all the things that go on, that word is sort of looked at in a way that's shameful, a way that something's not right. There are so many other ways you can say it. Someone being slightly overweight, or somebody that needs to go and just check with their GP that all their bloods are correct. I can understand that. But the word fat is, for me, it is an offensive word. It's one of those words that I don't like that is being used at all.
What do you make of it, Steve?
I think it's cobblers. I think what's happened is we've gone into this lovely world of political correctness where we think that if you use the word fat, people are suddenly going to have an eating disorder. It is absolute nonsense. And actually, the word fat is used by the Fat Acceptance Brigade. One of the reasons this country has become so fat is we are now singing that song. If you're happy and you're fat, clap your hands. And that's the problem. So I think we've also got to say kids are more resilient. And also, they are resilient. They can understand the difference between being, they understand the words fat and they understand the word thin. We don't seem to have a problem when we use the word too thin. The issue with child obesity, though, as well, in terms of communicating with our children, is parents. Parents need to realise that their non-verbal communication with their kids is really important. And I'm afraid we have too many podgy parents in this country. Again, they need to be told to stop gorging themselves and start being the role model to the kids.
But you see, this is where I disagree with you. You see, if you think, yes, it's up to the parents for us to teach our kids and for us to set the right example. But I'm going to give you an example of when I was a kid and people used to pick on me for the curly hair I had, which I still straighten to this day because I don't want to see in the mirror what those kids were calling me. It had a profound effect on me. Somebody calling you a word I won't use on TV, but what they used to call me because of the curly hair. You say to someone you're fat, you say that words like that, it can affect them long term. It's not just, it's not about being politically correct. It's about encouraging your kids to be active, encouraging them about good foods. You don't have to use the term fat. That's my honest opinion.
Well, I don't agree with you. I think it's how it's delivered. If the word fat can be delivered with compassion. It's not about running around the house saying, "Oi, Jimmy, you're getting really like a massive fatty." That would be wrong. I agree with you on that point. But if you're talking about being fat as wrong and being too thin as wrong, what's the problem with that? Absolutely nothing. This is the problem, you see. We're normalising it. We can't even use the word fat now. The world's gone bonkers. Wokery on steroids.
No, it's not being woke. I'm not. I'm honestly not. It's just certain words I don't think they were ever right. I don't think it's one of these things that you need to change now just because time's changing. It was never right.
Rhiannon, what do you think?
I mean, I can see both sides of the argument here. Now, as a nutrition professional, I work day in, day out with parents, with children that are looking to optimise their health, their gut health, everything really. And I do think language can have a profound effect on our youngsters. It's so important that parents are role models. Let's just discuss this for the fact. I don't agree, actually, that it's about how parents look. I think it's about how they raise their children, how they talk to their children, how they speak about themselves. They shouldn't be talking talking about their shape or size in a negative way in front of their children, because it can instill a negative relationship with food.
What do we do then? So what do we do then? It's all right, you three saying, oh, you shouldn't say this and you shouldn't say that. What do we do? I don't agree with you. Parents should be the role models. And if parents are taking their children out and they're fat themselves, and those kids are eating burgers and the children are too fat, that's child cruelty in my book. Child cruelty. We used to say that underfeeding was child cruelty. Overfeeding these days is child cruelty.
Nutrition is immensely important, and that's exactly what I just said, actually. I said that I think parents should speak in a positive way to their children and shape their mental health, which is incredibly important.
Absolutely.
But as a health professional myself, I do believe that the education isn't there. And I don't have all the answers for the obesity epidemic that we are currently in, because it's a multifactorial problem. We've got psychology issues, we've got governmental, who's regulating the food industry, where's the money going, where's the advertising money going, marketing campaigns. What about the nutrition education?
You're talking about the problems, you're not talking about the solutions. You're talking about the problems, not solutions. The problem with the solution with childhood obesity is, number one, parent role models. Parenting is power. We know that. And don't get me wrong, there are many fantastic parents out there. But I'm telling you now, in my opinion, there are many parents out there that do an horrendous job, that actually stuff their faces, sitting on a sofa with their kids, getting fatter and fatter, and allowing their kids to do the same. That is wrong. That is cruelty. And the ticket to solving the child obesity epidemic, whatever we want to call it, is through parenting, not expecting everyone else to do it for them. If you're having kids, they're your responsibility. You think before you breed.
That's agreed, but still the words you use will have a profound effect.
Social media, let's talk about the fact that a lot of people are going to the wrong resources for nutritional information and help. Like, people are going to TikTok for crazes on nutritional fad diets. Parents don't know where to turn. I'm not saying I defend people that feed their children poorly if they know better. I'm saying some people maybe don't know. And I really wish that we could get the healthy nutritional information out there to parents, because we know that...
No. And the thing is, Peter, I have to take issue, here, when it comes to TikTok, what happens on TikTok a lot nowadays is we're celebrating fat. Do you think we should celebrate fat, Peter?
I think as parents, we should be encouraging our children to be active. It's one of the most important things. When you're active as a child, you end up making better choices overall. You're outdoors, you're doing things, you're drinking water, you're having fruit. My point is that the words we use to our kids, I promise you, will have a long-lasting effect, and we've got to be careful what we say to them. I've been guilty of things.
I know. Listen. I have to say, I agree totally with you. I could hug you for that one, right? You're right. Kids should be out playing with their parents and all of that sort of thing. The word fat won't kill you. Being fat will. And I'm afraid that's the sort of message we need to be putting out there. We need to be braver. We need to be bolder. We need to be stronger, like they do in Japan. Japan has 5% obesity. In this country, quadruple it.
Rhiannon, 10 seconds from you. We're going to give you the final word on this.
I think ultimately, when we know that 43% of people in the country don't know fiber's even good for them, that's a stat from California Almonds, I think we need to really get to the point that nutritional education can make a huge difference, but just as much as positive language and support. And I agree, we need to get comfortable with the language we use, and it's okay to use words in the right way.
OK, Steve, Rhiannon, thank you so much for your time this morning. Do get in touch with your view on that. We know lots of you are going to have an opinion. gbnews@gbnews.com. Now, coming up, ITV is to face questioning by MPs over their handling of Philip Schofield's affair. We'll have the latest on that next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Dubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
ITV bosses will be grilled by MPs amid reports that Philip Schofield's young lover was paid off by the channel.
Good morning. It's 9 o'clock on Wednesday, the 31st of May. This is Breakfast on GB News with the lovely Ellie Costello and Peter Andre.
Here's what's leading the news this morning. ITV executives will face televised questioning by MPs over how they handled Philip Schofield's affair with a younger male colleague. It comes as the Prince's Trust charity drops the presenter as an ambassador, saying it was no longer appropriate to work together.
Ministers are facing accusations of a cover-up after it refused to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages to the pandemic inquiry. The government has been given an extension, with the unredacted files now due at 4 p.m. tomorrow.
Artificial intelligence could wipe out humanity. That's the warning from industry leaders in a joint statement in which they compare the threat to nuclear war and pandemics. The Prime Minister confirmed yesterday he's in talks with world leaders about managing the danger it poses.
And with the NHS at breaking point and soaring food costs pushing people towards less healthy options, obesity has never been a more pressing issue. We'll take a look at what can be done to solve it and how we can stop our children making the same mistakes.
So many of you have been getting in touch this morning. Do keep them coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. Lots of you getting in touch on obesity and food psychology. We've been talking about it all morning. David says, children nowadays just don't get enough exercise. They spend too much time on phones and computers.
Yeah, Andy says, I was brought up in a poor family. We ate stews, casseroles and lots of vegetables because it was cheap and healthy for us. In my view, we need to stop giving people an excuse to be fat. It's your decision to eat badly.
Steve says, to help elevate the problem of childhood obesity, I think we need to remove the fizzy drink vending machine from schools and make the outsourced school dinners healthy. I think, Steve, that has already happened with Jamie Oliver. I think whilst we were at school, we had very, very healthy meals brought in, much to the distaste of the girls at my school. But let us know what you think if you're a parent at home. How do you fix the issue of childhood obesity? And do you think it's OK to use the word fat? That's what we're saying this morning. Pete doesn't. No. I do. gbnews@gbnews.com. To our top story now, and ITV bosses will face questions from MPs over how much they knew of Philip Schofield's affair following claims that his lover was paid off by the channel.
The Daily Mail has reported that the younger man received a financial settlement from the broadcaster before being moved to a different daytime programme within the organisation.
Well, meanwhile, former ITV presenter, now GB News breakfast host Eamonn Holmes spoke to Dan Wootton for part 2 of that explosive sit-down interview in which he addressed the controversy around so-called Qgate.
They were there to make a film on the Queen's funeral. Now, unless there's any documentary evidence of this, I would put it to you that is another lie. So Philip Schofield admits he lies. ITV lie. The place is a den of iniquity, an absolute den of iniquity.
Which brings us to that night at the National Television Awards where everything changed. And then lo and behold, Eamonn, just a few days later, you're asked, out of the blue, confronted, ambushed, you might say, to reveal that Philip was going to come out as gay. So what happened that night at the National Television Awards from your perspective, and how did it lead on to Philip coming out?
So anyway, he comes into our dressing room and he falls down on his knees. I mean, the acting is amazing. You know, he falls down on his knees crying. And I said to him, what's the matter? What's the matter? I'm gay. I'm gay. And I walked over and I said, is that all? So we then began to feel there was a certain line being pattered here. Ruth said, no, I know what I'm going to say. Us believing the truth is that Philip is revealing he's gay and coming out. And Ruth ad-libs without any autocue or anything else. I just decided at this point, not sure. I'm just beginning to feel bad vibes about this. I think I'm not saying anything. Then it goes to those two in their choreographed way, knowing how false they are. I'm sure they rehearsed it for days as to what they were going to say and do and who was going to hug. And Holly was very specific about where she sat, where Philip sat, where Ruth sat, where I sat. It was all choreographed, right?
So this has been planned for some time.
It's been planned for some time. And it was all a bit weird. At that stage, though, I believed he was gay and that's what he was coming out. And that was the information we were given. We were lied to. And Ruth and I, to this day, are embarrassed and ashamed when we see those pictures, when we see the toils that some people who are tortured by their sexuality have to go through. And this man, was this a cover-up for something else?
It's a bombshell interview. I really recommend that you watch both parts. It's available on GB News YouTube channel. Now, our South East of England reporter, Ray Addison, is outside of Television Centre in London, where This Morning is filmed. And Ray, the front page of the Sun newspaper this morning says, defiant Holly, she's going to be back on Monday.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning to you both. The Sun, a source close to Holly Willoughby, saying that she's absolutely determined to return to the This Morning sofa on Monday morning. Now, that in her view, she's been lied to by Philip Schofield. She says she has nothing to hide and she is devoted to the show and will continue to do the best job that she can for them. However, some people that I'm speaking to here questioning the timing of this decision, saying maybe she's not getting the best advice. Of course, she'll be on the sofa on Monday. On Tuesday, there'll be these questions to ITV executives from politicians. Who knows what could come out of that? And people here saying to me that they believe that she should wait until there's been a thorough inquiry and only then return.
OK, Ray, thank you so much for bringing us the latest in this ongoing saga. I have a feeling you're going to be there for a number of days. Thank you very much.
Right, so Eamonn says some damaging things, right? His words are, Philip lies, ITV lies, and it's a den of iniquity. Now, so what does that do, not only for the This Morning brand, but the ITV brand?
It's hugely damaging. You know, when you've got a household brand lying, proven to be lying, then it's a difficult one. So the bosses need to address this. It cannot be brushed under the carpet. You know, I think the bosses expected this to probably 2-3 days on the front pages. We've seen it on the front pages even today, weeks after. It's everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. It's not going away. So how do they address it? And they need to, because without the public's trust, they don't have a show. We've seen advertisers pull out. There's a danger of there not being a show, despite what the bosses say. Nothing's happening to the show. Well, you need the viewers' trust, and you need to restore that, and you do it by giving answers and not, you know, and they do news reviews just like we do here. They don't address it. And they need to.
And time is ticking, isn't it, Mayor? Because ITV bosses are going to be facing questioning from MPs on Tuesday. They're going to be asked what they knew about the affair and how they handled it. So they're going to have their story straight by then. And it's also going to be televised. It's going to be box office stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, we've seen what trials in Hollywood and elsewhere do. Everyone's going to be watching, not only the media, but the public. And actually, I hope this has given them some breathing space. A couple of weeks, get your story correct, find out the facts and restore that trust the public needs in you. So, yeah, I'm glad there's an inquiry because you need answers, you know. Look at what's happened when the media aren't kind. And they need to restore their reputation.
I mean, sorry.
No, you go.
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, it's a really tough thing because we're hearing a lot of hearsay and things are changing every single day. So just when you think something, for example, what's on the cover today with the Sun saying that Holly will be back on Monday, maybe tomorrow something else is going to come out and then she won't be there. And it's just changing rapidly.
It's absolutely changed rapidly. And look, there's the mental health of two people, Philip Schofield and the young person in question, that they need support. Philip's been dropped by his management, and without the support of the management, you know, he's in a difficult situation. This young person, what support has he got? And there's a bounty on his head. So, look, who knows? It's a few days away from Monday. There's a lot that can happen, and let's hope the public restore their trust in the brand.
Mayor Riaz, really good to see you this morning. Thank you so much for your analysis.
Right, leading tech giants have warned that mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority.
Well, it comes as the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says the UK can play a leadership role in regulating the use of AI. Well, let's speak now to Shadow International Trade Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds. Really good to see you this morning. Thank you so much for your company. I mean, terrifying headlines on the front of some of the newspapers this morning. The Daily Mail, AI could wipe out humanity. The Eye says AI creators fear the extinction of humanity, comparing the threat to nuclear war and pandemics. I mean, Rishi Sunak is at the forefront of this. He wants to manage the dangers and he's talking with world leaders. How would the Labour Party deal with AI and the speed of which this is all developing? How would you regulate it?
Well, firstly, it's very good to join you this morning. Always great to do that. Well, looking at those headlines this morning, the government's white paper on AI from a couple of months ago already feels out of date, doesn't it? I mean, the government was just offering a series of vague promises and saying that somehow existing regulators were going to deal with this. Well, I don't think that is the correct approach. We need a proper strategic approach from the government. It needs to both regulate, but also allow space for innovation. What we need to do here is to become a world leader in AI. We need to be at the forefront of this new technology, both in terms of mitigating and regulating its dangers, but also seeing its extraordinary possibility as well.
It is something that really, really does worry people. So it's good that you are so happy to answer that question. I wanted to ask you about Labour increasing sugar tax. That's something that Wes Streeting is looking at the moment. Great concern to many families who are already struggling to pay food bills. I mean, food inflation is already at 19.1%.
Yes, and we're looking at a series of options around this, and you're absolutely right. We have to be very careful. We want, obviously, to encourage healthy choices, but we don't want to be adding to the already spiralling cost of living. Some of the things we've been suggesting, for example, is around school breakfast clubs. We think that every child should have access to a healthy breakfast at school. And we've been talking about funding that by abolishing the non-dom tax status so that people with assets around the world who are currently not paying tax on that would pay tax here in the UK. But we also need to look at things like, for example, junk food advertising at post 9 o'clock. We should be implementing that ban. So we need to be taking measures to encourage healthy eating and to deal with childhood obesity as far as we possibly can.
Boris Johnson's text messages, his WhatsApp messages, do you think it should be private? Do you think it should be public? He is in a position of authority. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that the government has to comply with Baroness Hallett's requests for these messages. And the reason is we need to see the full background to the decisions the government made during the pandemic. Now, I totally understand why, for reasons of speed, government ministers and officials did use WhatsApp. I think we can all understand that because of how quickly things were moving. But just as in governments of the past, you had the logic of all the decisions on paper, you had transcripts of phone calls. So now, as Baroness Hallett, the independent chair, has requested, those WhatsApps, as she's asked for, should be provided. And they should be provided, frankly, because the thousands of families out there who lost loved ones in the pandemic deserve to have the truth. And we need to learn the lessons from this health emergency for future health emergencies too.
Do you then suggest that all communication in government should be confidential, or you should be able to offer it out to any inquiry that asks for it? Because that is potentially a dangerous precedent to set, isn't it? It could hinder decision-making at a time of crisis if ministers feel like they can't communicate freely with one another for fear of it being asked for by an inquiry later on down the line.
But this is a specific type of inquiry with specific statutory powers that's been set up. And I've looked carefully at what Baroness Hallett, who's a widely respected former judge, has said. And she is saying, if you look at the notice that she's issued, that she thinks there is relevant material in WhatsApp messages between certain senior ministers, the most senior civil servant. And I think she should be the judge of that. I don't think it is about setting a precedent because of the very particular nature of this inquiry and the very particular powers that Baroness Hallett has got. And I think the government should simply comply with the order that she's made.
OK, moving on to the Australia-New Zealand trade deal comes into effect this week. Do you think it will actually deliver the economic boost that has been promised?
It can deliver an economic boost if the government is willing to actually support our exporters properly. If you look at the moment, this year, 2023, the OBR is saying that exports overall will fall by 6.6%. That's a hit of over £51 billion to the economy. Now, if the government is far more proactive, I've argued, for example, for export hubs in every nation and region of the UK, people actually on the ground specialising in things like high-end climate technology, working with the devolved administrations, with universities and innovators to get that support to exporters.
OK, Nick, thank you so much. Sorry, I'm just going to have to cut you off there. We are running out of time, but really good to see you this morning. Thank you so much for your time and all of those stories. Nick Thomas-Symonds there for us. Now, To The Point is coming up at 9:30. Andrew Pearce and Dawn Neeson are here to tell us all about it. What's coming up on today's programme?
Is the end of humanity nigh?
It is, actually. The robots are taking over. And you know what? Robots are making robots, which is even scarier.
Yeah,
they're more intelligent than you.
Far more intelligent than you.
That's not difficult.
This is all about these major reports saying AI could literally spell the end of humanity if it falls into the wrong hands. Just imagine AI in nuclear bombs in North Korea.
Yeah, you're not helping here. And plus we go back to that Schofield issue again.
We do.
It's not going away.
Senior executives of ITV before a select committee of MPs next week. Hopefully the MPs will ask good and challenging questions, but I'm not so sure I've got much faith in that. And speeding.
And speeding, of course. 20-mile-an-hour zones are making lots of money. Who'd have thought of it? It's all to keep you safe, folks. Remember, it's not about making money.
Exactly. That's us to the point.
See you soon.
OK, Andrew and Dawn, thank you so much. It's a packed show coming up very, very shortly, so don't miss it.
Coming up, we'll speak to a man who's one of the youngest children to ever get an ASBO, who's now turned his life around and wants to help others to do the same. That's coming up next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more important,